go. You're
Good.
all set.
Thank you. Okay, so there we're ready to go. Turn in your Bibles to Numbers chapter 13 and 14. So the Israelites, the goal is to take the land that God has promised them. So they're on the move about a year after they have left Egypt. So in Numbers 13, Moses sends spies out to check out the land. Okay, so what is it like? And so the verse 18 of Numbers 13, they're supposed to see what the land is like. Are the people strong, weak? Are there a lot of them? What about the land? Is it a good land, not a good land? How about the cities? What do they look like? So go all the way through the land and check it out. And so that's what they do. And they come back. And notice in verse 23, they cut down a branch with a single cluster of grapes, and they carry it on a pole between two of them. And then they also bring back pomegranates and figs. Now, I don't know about you, but when I go to the grocery store, I don't need any help bringing the grapes. You know, I can go, I can pick that bunch of grapes. I can just carry it all by myself all the way home. And so these guys carry a cluster of grapes between two guys. So this is, wow, this is a good land, right? Awesome. And so they report on what they have seen and heard. Verse 27 is an awesome land. It does flow with milk and honey. This is its fruit. But the people who live in the land, man, wow, they're kind of strong. And the cities, they're strong too. They're fortified and big. And we saw these people, the descendants of Anak. And so those are in the Bible some very big people. So Caleb, he's one of the spies. Joshua also is one of the spies. Caleb speaks up and says, hey, we should go up and take possession because we are going to overcome it. But the other spies, 10 are against this plan because, look, they say we're not going to make it. They're too strong for us. We will not. Verse 33, we saw the Nephilim, okay, and we became like grasshoppers in our own sight. And so in chapter 14, verse 2, what do the people do? They do this well, right? They grumble. And they grumble and say, oh man, we should have died in Egypt or died in the wilderness. Why is the Lord bringing us into this land to fall by the sword? Our wives and our little ones will become plunder. Wouldn't it be better for us to return to Egypt? Hello, what is the matter with these people? So, how did they get out of Egypt? There was the 10 plagues against Egypt, culminating in the Passover, the death of the firstborn. How did your firstborn not die? You put blood around the doorpost. They're wandering around in the wilderness, and we didn't look at all this, but water comes from very unexpected places. They get manna. They're still getting manna. Okay? So why can't they believe that God will bring them into the land? Very sad. But they don't believe. They don't believe God can bring them into the land. And so that's very, very sad. So, God is about ready to take them out. But Joshua, verse 6, Joshua and Caleb, again, they say, man, we can do this. The Lord will bring us through the land. But you know the end of the story. God says, okay, this is what's going to happen. Go to verse 31. Your children who said you would become prey, they're going to go into this land. verse 32 and 33, your corpses, you guys are going to die in the wilderness. Your children will be shepherds for 40 years. They're going to suffer for your unfaithfulness. Because why are they going to suffer? Because they could be going in and conquering the land and living in the land. But they're going to have to wander around 40 years till all this generation has died. Joshua and Caleb, they will get to enter the land. Then, look at what's typical of people. So, you kind of doubt God, and then God says, okay, well, you can't have it. And so what do? Then they try to go do what God told them to do. So they go fight a battle, and it doesn't really work for them. So God said, this is what's going to happen. It's too late, okay? Deal with the consequences. You had a shot, you blew it. So the Israelites now have to wander for 40 years in the wilderness. And as we continue on, there's more grumbling and complaining. In chapters 16 and 17, a guy named Korah, who is a Levite, so he's of the priestly tribe, he grumbles and grumbles against Moses. And verse 3, why do you exalt yourself before the Lord? Korah ends up being swallowed up by the earth. Moses prays and says, Lord, let something different happen. And so they end up dying. Just sad that, again, all that God has done for the people, they can't see what he has done. But it's, I guess, not really different from us, because God does things for us too, and we don't always see it. So they have the need to figure out, has God really called Aaron and his family to be the high priests? So obviously Korah, his idea was wrong, but now they're going to make sure that it's supposed to be with Aaron. So in verse 3, Aaron writes his name on the rod. Other people write their names on the rods for the different tribes. And the one whose rod sprouts is going to, that's the one that God has chosen. And so, I don't know, I think it's kind of funny sometimes how God works. So Moses takes all these 12 rods and sticks them in the tabernacle. And look at verse 8 of chapter 17. So 17:8. The rod of Aaron for the house of Levi, it sprouted, it put forth buds, produced blossoms, and bore ripe fruit. So that night, this rod was very busy, because it even bore almonds. So no question about which family is chosen to be the priests. Now we get then to Numbers 20, and this is kind of a sad chapter, because in Numbers 20, Miriam dies in verse 1, and there's no water, and so the people grumble against Moses and Aaron. And so the Lord talks to Moses and Aaron, and in verse 8 says, take the rod, you and your brother Aaron, speak to the rock before their eyes, that it might yield water. You will bring forth water for them for out of the rock. So Moses does what God said. He took the rod, and he and Aaron stand before the people and say, well, I don't know if this is exactly what God told them to say. Listen now, you rebels. Shall we bring forth water from you out of the rock? And then what does Moses do? He hits the rock. Uh-oh, problem. Because the water comes out, right? So it does come out, but Moses and Aaron are told, because you didn't believe me, to treat me as holy, okay, in the sight of Israel, you're not going to bring this assembly into the land. So Moses, after all he's done, blows it before the Lord, and so he does not get to go into the land that God has promised him. Because, now notice, he didn't treat God as holy, so he can't go in. So that's too bad. We continue on, verse 23, then Aaron dies, and in chapter 21, I don't know, it's just like a common refrain, right? Chapter 21, verse 5, once again, the people speak against God and Moses. Why have you brought us out of Egypt to die in the wilderness? There isn't any food or water, and we don't like this food. So they must be getting tired of manna. And so God sends fiery serpents to bite the people. And so, verse 7, okay, the people say, gee, we've sinned. We've spoken against the Lord. Please intercede with the Lord. And so the Lord tells Moses to make a fiery serpent, put it on a standard, on a pole, and it comes about that everyone who is bitten, when they look at it, they'll live. And so that's what Moses does, makes it out of bronze. And if you look at this bronze serpent, you live. How does that work? What does looking at a bronze serpent do for you if you've been bit by the serpent? How are you not dying? You just look at it. Oh, that's nice. Power of God, right? So God is doing something. It doesn't make sense that if you look at this standard that the snake bite isn't going to affect you. But that's what God says he's going to do, and that's what God does. Okay, so then as we continue in Numbers, it tells us about how Israel defeats a couple of kings on the eastern side of the Jordan River. And then in Numbers 25, Numbers 25, in the beginning of Numbers 25, once again, the people are unfaithful to the Lord. And they play the harlot, it says, with the daughters of Moab. And they bow down to their gods. Israel joined themselves to Baal of Peor, and the Lord is angry with them. So God tells them to take the leaders and execute them in broad daylight before the Lord, so that the fierce anger of the Lord may turn away from Israel. So Moses says to the judges, each of you need to slay your men who have joined themselves to Baal of Peor. And one of the Israelites, he brings to his relatives a Midianite woman in the sight of Moses and the congregation of Israel while they're weeping at the doorway of the tent of meeting. So blatant disregard for what's going on. Phinehas, who is the son of Eleazar is the son of Aaron, who was a high priest, he sees it, so he gets up, grabs a spear, goes after the guy that went into this tent, and runs them both through with the spear. And it says, the plague on the children of Israel was checked. It's kind of drastic action, don't you think? But again, it was what was needed. Sin had to be confronted. And so in this case, these people had to be taken out. In the book of Deuteronomy, when it talks about various punishments for sin, a lot of times it uses a phrase, you must purge the evil within you. So sometimes you have to take drastic action to get rid of the evil that is in your midst. Christians, I would argue, we have a very hard time doing these kinds of things, maybe especially Minnesotans, because we're supposed to be nice to everybody, right? And yes, that's a good thing, I would argue. I don't think that's all bad, but not if we're not afraid to tell people the whole truth. And sometimes it's hard. The truth ends up being hard. Okay, so that kind of, in a little nutshell, is the book of Numbers. Okay. Now let us then move to Deuteronomy. Is it working now or is it not working? Yeah, that was okay. Okay. So Deuteronomy. The title we use comes from the Septuagint. The Septuagint translated the second law. And so it's suggested that what we have in Deuteronomy is a law that is different from what we have in the rest of the Torah. That is not true. It is the same. God hasn't changed. In Deuteronomy 17:18. So Deuteronomy 17:18, it's in a section that talks about a king. Now, Israel doesn't have any king yet. They don't have a king for a while because they don't have one under Joshua. They don't have one under Judges. But in for Samuel, they get a king. And so, but God gives instructions. So when you get a king, you need to have an Israelite be king, shouldn't multiply horses for himself, nor cause the people to return to Egypt, not multiply wives or silver and gold. Now, verse 18, when he sits on the throne of his kingdom, he shall write for himself a copy of this law. And in both Hebrew and Greek, the word copy can have the idea of a second, the idea of an additional, or it can mean what we mean by a copy. And so the Greek translation has the idea of a copy of this law, or a second. Actually, the Septuagint has the idea of a second law, which makes it sound like it's different from the first law. It's not. So the law that God gave earlier in Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy is just part of that broader law. It will repeat some things. Deuteronomy has the 10 Commandments in it, etc. So it's not a different law that God is giving in Deuteronomy. It's, more instructions, maybe here and there, some clarification, but it all is based on what we have in the previous section of the Torah. Okay, so Deuteronomy, the 40 years of wandering, are over, and now they are on the eastern side of the Jordan River, north of the Dead Sea, so they are set. They just have to cross the Jordan River to go in. Okay, the people that left Egypt, they've died off, except for Joshua and Caleb. Otherwise, everybody that saw what took place in Egypt, has died off, unless you were really young. Okay, so those people would have witnessed the Yam Suf, the crossing of the Yam Suf. So Moses wants to give instructions to this new generation and communicate to them what God has said in the past. So this is kind of the focus of Deuteronomy. Now, one of the things Deuteronomy talks about is, here, this is the map. So you can see, if you look at, the plains of Moab, can you see it on the far side of the map? Right north of that body of water, the big blue body of water that says, you might know, if you can't see, it's the Dead Sea. You have the bottom body of water, which is a branch of the Red Sea, and then that body in the middle. Okay, so they're at the top of that body of water. They're ready, cross the Jordan. They can go conquer Jericho. Now, let us talk about the law. You guys have a handout actually on the Old Testament law. And let me find my law thing. So how many of you like law? Like fun to read, exciting? Like nobody even raises their hand. That's so sad. Okay, so the law. Let's think about the law a little bit, found in different sections. Exodus 20 through Deuteronomy 33. We looked at the book of the covenant, the Deuteronomic code. So Deuteronomy 12 through 26 has a bunch of laws. We already talked about the holiness code in Leviticus 17 through 26. Be holy as I am holy. Now, in Hebrew, the word law is Torah, and it actually comes from a root that has the idea of teach. I don't know, when we think of law, like, is law good? Do you think law is good? Like laws of America or things like that we have? For the most part, you think it's good? Okay, what about, yeah? You guys think it's good? So like the law that says you're only supposed to go 55 miles down that road, we're good at that. That's a good law, and we follow that, right? Yeah. There's a slight problem with that, right? Okay. So in Hebrew, the idea behind law, it comes from Hebrew words are built on the verbs. And so the Hebrew root of Torah is actually instruction. The Hebrew verb means to teach. So what Torah actually means is instruction. Not formally law like we think of law, but it's instructions. Instructions about what? How to live in a way that honors God. So that's what God is giving them. How do you live in a way that will honor me? Which is super different from all the other nations around. So when you look around and you see how other people worship their deities, it's different. It's going to be different. Now, there are some similarities because they live in the same culture. And so there are some standards, like it's not okay to steal, and murder for the most part is looked down on, and being faithful to your spouse in particular. Wife needs to be faithful to her husband. Those things are found, broadly speaking, in culture. But God gives a lot of other laws. Now, it says in Deuteronomy 6:24 and 10:13 that the law is intended for the good of the people. It was given for the good of the people. So it's a good thing. And it is not a vehicle of salvation. In other words, well, if you could keep the whole law perfectly, yes, you'd be okay, because you wouldn't have broken any of God's commandments. But nobody is going to keep the law perfectly. The law, remember, the instructions, they have things built in. So we talked about offerings before. There is a sin offering. Why would you need to offer a sin offering? Because you did something wrong, right? So you're going to break the law. It's just a given. God knows that's going to happen. But these are the things, if you want to honor God, that you should do. So they're actually good for people. But they're not ever meant for somebody to come along and keep all of them and be saved. It's not external. Salvation is not external. In Deuteronomy, now we can go to it, 13:16. 13:16 talks about, is this it? Oh, no, 10. No, it's Deuteronomy. I always forget where it is. Deuteronomy 10:16. 10:16. In Deuteronomy 10:16, it says, circumcise what? Your heart. Okay? Circumcise your heart. God is concerned about a person's heart. Now, in the Old Testament, we sometimes think God is only concerned with rules and regulations. You have to do this, that. You have to do all these sacrifices, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And if you do them, you'll make God happy. No, what is it really? It's connected to the heart. Because your heart is sensitive to God, you do those things. So that's where it comes from. So it's not about the external stuff. It's always been about what's inside. So there are different laws. You have laws that are just, this is don't do this or do this, like the 10 Commandments, honor your father and mother, etc. There are case laws. If this happens, then this you do. There are similar laws, again, as we've talked about in the broader ancient Near Eastern world. And they have similar, sometimes they have similar punishments. So if you kidnap somebody, in both the Old Testament and the ancient Near Eastern laws, you'll be put to death. If you steal something during the day, you will be subject to a fine. If you steal something at night, you will be put to death. This is Stele of Hammurabi. Have you guys heard of Hammurabi? Yep. Okay, so he has this famous law code somewhere around 1750 or whatever. Now, the law code in the Code of Hammurabi compared to the law code that we have, say, in the first five, or in the Exodus through Deuteronomy, they have, again, some similarities. Now, the Code of Hammurabi begins, so Hammurabi he's a guy standing here. He's standing before the deity, getting the code of laws. So he gets the laws from his deity, so that's cool. But then once you get into the code itself, it doesn't ever mention the deity at all. Not true in Deuteronomy, because in Deuteronomy and in the law code of the Lord, it's all connected. The things you do are all connected to God and who he is. So it spells it out in Deuteronomy 15, 7 through 11. If there's a poor man among you, one of your fellow Israelites, in any of your towns, don't harden your heart, nor close your hand. You need to freely open your hand to him and generously lend to him whatever he needs. And be careful. Don't think, well, it's close to the 7th year, the year of Jubilee, when all debts will be forgiven. So if I lend him too much money, I'm never going to recoup it. Don't think that way. This guy, or your poor fellow Israelite may cry to the Lord against you, and it will be a sin to you. Generously give, and your heart will not be grieved when you give to him, because for this thing the Lord your God will bless you in all your work and in all your undertakings. So the law is constructed so that you will do those things that honor God. It's all based on how do you love your neighbor as yourself. Now, how do the laws fit together then? So we've talked about Deuteronomy 6:5, Leviticus 19:18. So in the New Testament, when Jesus is asked what's the greatest commandment, he says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your miod, with all your might. Second greatest commandment. So you love God first, and then you love your neighbor. So how does that fit with what other laws we have? So the greatest commandment is to love God with everything you have. So that's foundational. Most important, love God. Secondly then, so first you love God, then you love your fellow human beings. Okay, what about the 10 Commandments? So go to, if you're in Deuteronomy, we can go to Deuteronomy 5. Deuteronomy 5. And we have the 10 Commandments. So the 10 Commandments, it's argued, relate to the greatest commandment and the second greatest commandment. So the first commandments talk about how do you relate to God? How do you treat God? Don't have any other gods before me. Verse 7, don't make an idol. Worship them or serve them. Verse 9, Don't take the name of the Lord your God in vain. And people will throw and observe the Sabbath and keep it holy. So that's how you love the Lord your God. Now, how do you love your neighbor as yourself? Well, what are you supposed to do? You are supposed to honor your father and your mother, verse 16. And what else should you do? How do you love your neighbor? You don't murder your neighbor. You don't commit adultery against your neighbor, neighbor's wife. You don't steal. You don't bear false witness against your neighbor. And you don't desire your neighbor's wife, your neighbor's house, your neighbor's field, male servant, etc., 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 anything that belongs to your neighbor. So that's how you love your neighbor as yourself. So the Old Testament is giving further instructions on what this actually looks like, fleshing it out. What does it look like in God's eyes when you do these kinds of things? And then all the rest of the laws that are given fall under that parameter. They're either going to help a person know how to love God, or they're going to help a person know what does it look like to love your neighbor as yourself. So if you steal your neighbor's sheep, what's it going to look like? If you love your neighbor as yourself, well, you're going to pay the sheep back and then give them a little bit extra to boot. And then hopefully you will learn what it means to love your neighbor as yourself, and you won't keep stealing your neighbor's sheep, okay? Because that's not really very loving to your neighbor. Okay. So then, one of the questions then we have is, what do we do with these laws? How do we apply them today? Do they have anything to say to us today, these laws? Or they're old, right? The Old Testament is old, doesn't really have much to say to us today. Yeah, I know you guys don't believe that. Okay, so there are different ways. Some people, dispensationalism says that there is nothing that applies in the Old Testament unless the New Testament repeats it. So therefore, most of the Old Testament law doesn't apply to us today. Another group argues for what they call covenant theology. And so the law is divided into three groups. So they say there are civil laws that are related to Israel's government. There are ceremonial laws, which are related to how you worship, the priesthood, etc. And there are moral laws. And only the moral laws apply to us today. So what happens then if only the moral laws apply to us today is we end up losing a lot of laws. So principles of right and wrong behavior, ethics. And the other difficulty with the breaking of the laws into civil, ceremonial, and moral is it isn't as cut and dried. So go back to Exodus 22. Exodus 22:21. So Exodus 2:21 says, "You should not wrong a stranger or oppress him, because you were strangers in the land of Egypt." But then notice, if you keep reading, it gives a reason why you should do it this way. "If you afflict him at all, and if he cries out to me, I'll surely hear his cry. My anger will be kindled, and I will kill you with the sword, and your wives will become widows, and your children fatherless." So there aren't pre-cut sections. It doesn't have, okay, this is a civil law, this is a moral law, this is a ceremonial law. The Old Testament isn't laid out. The laws aren't laid out in that section. They're all mixed together. So it seems like that would be a difficulty with that one. Well, obviously, I've kind of talked about all of them. Theonomy believes that the Old Testament law should function as a civil society for today. So if you were caught stealing, well, let's do a serious one. If someone was caught committing adultery, what should happen to them according to Old Testament law? Yep, they should be put to death. So theonomy believes that that is what should happen in America. So our laws should be the laws that we have in the Old Testament. The last one would be timeless principles. So if the Old Testament is telling us who God is, and it's telling us who God is in that particular culture, the Old Testament culture, then what we want to do is try and figure out, what is this law showing us about God? And how would we bring it into our culture today? And in Deuteronomy, it talks about you should build a rail around your roof. Now, should we build rails around our roof? Not mine. Why do you have? What? You have a good roof? A gutter? No, a gutter isn't a. No, it's a little rail. You know, like, it's a little rail around your roof. You actually build not a gutter, because that's below your roof, hopefully, or it's not really doing any good as a gutter. So you want something that's above your roof. So you'd put a little border around your roof. It would, see, that would be good, right? It would catch snow, and you could have a little pretty snow thing around there. And you might have a little bit of an ice dam. And, well, then the benefit of that is inside your house, your living room or whatever, you could have a little just waterfall that would come through the ceiling in the winter. Yeah, so see, that would be cool, right? Okay. So, dumb idea to build a rail around your roof. That's a stupid law. That's why you read all these laws and they're just pointless. It's a waste of our time to read them. Why did God tell them to build a rail around the roof? Because he just thought, I need to give them some laws, so I might as well make some stuff up. So they wouldn't fall, yes, because your roof was an extension kind of your house, right? So they didn't need peaked roofs like we do. Why do we have peaked roofs? Snow, because the snow is very, very heavy, and if our roofs are kind of flat, they'll end up kind of going the wrong way of a peak, so we have to have peaked roofs. But there, yeah, they get snow once in a while in Jerusalem, but it only lasts like 3 days, and it's all melted. So they can have flat roofs. And in the Old Testament, we see people using their roof. For example, Rahab in Joshua, where does she have her flax? On the roof, which is where she hides the spies. So the roof was an extension of your house, so you put a rail so nobody falls off of your roof and gets hurt. So what principle does that show us? What's important to God? People, right? So you don't want people to get hurt. So if you can make your place safe, make it safe. So, light snow, right, if the snow comes up, I don't know, they keep changing the forecast. So if you go out and you have a ton of snow and maybe it's sloppy and your grandma is coming over, what are you going to do to the sidewalk? Yeah, you better shovel it, right, if your grandma or your grandpa is coming over. Why are you going to do that? You love them, right? And you don't want them to get hurt. You don't want them to slip and fall and hurt themselves. So you take care of your place. If the kid left the rake in the middle of the sidewalk and you know somebody's going to come, you go and put the rake away, right? Or at least throw it on the lawn. So the same idea. People are important to God. He wants people to be responsible, to take care of things so that somebody won't get hurt. So how do we put that into practice today? So what we're doing when we look at the Old Testament laws is we're trying to figure out, how does this show us God's values? right? Why does he give them a law? Because does God just give them arbitrary laws because he can? He's got the power. You know, he can make you all drink orange juice in the morning because he has the power. Even if you hate orange juice, it doesn't really matter. He says you have to drink orange juice. No, that's not who God is, right? He loves people. He cares about them. So laws are given to honor him and also to care for other people. So in my mind, the Old Testament law, now there are some that are very confusing and it's hard to figure out how to apply them today. But I think if we look at a lot of them, we can see what God is trying to do through this law. And so then we bring it into our culture and apply it to our lives today. And we actually build rails around things at our house, don't we? So if you have a deck and it's too far off the ground, what do you put around the deck? A rail, right? And we even have laws that if it's, I don't know exactly the laws, but you have to have your slats have to be, or your boards have to be so close together. Why? Can't see out very well when they are, but why do you do that? A little kid comes in and they could fall if it's too wide, and so it has to be narrow enough so a little kid can't fall down a story, whatever it might be. We have a deck, it's a second story deck, so we have, the deck was there when we came, and so no kid has fallen off the deck, which is a good thing, right? So, okay, so that kind of in a nutshell is the law. Does the New Testament throw out the law? Nope. Okay, we're going to go right here in 1 Timothy 5:18. Paul actually quotes Deuteronomy 25:4. He's talking about a laborer is worthy of their wages. And so he ends up referring back to Deuteronomy 24, which says, don't muzzle an ox while they're threshing. Now, how on earth does that relate to a laborer is worthy of their wages? So in 1 Timothy 5:17, it says, the elders who rule well are to be considered worthy of double honor, especially those who work hard at preaching and teaching. And then Scripture says, you shall not muzzle the ox while he is threshing, and the laborer is worthy of his wages. Why would you, what does it mean to thresh? Right. So when you harvest your grain in ancient times, you would harvest it close to the ground, okay? And then remember Joseph, his sheaf, his brother's sheaves bowed down to his sheaf, okay? You gather it all together, so you have your stalks with your grain on the top. So you bundle those together. Then, you want the grain on top, so you bring it to the threshing floor, which isn't really a floor at all. It is just like the top of a hill that's somewhat flat, a high place that's going to get a breeze. So then you bring your sheaves to the threshing floor, you lay them out, and then you have something. If you have an ox, you might have what's called a threshing sledge, a bunch of timbers that are connected together. You might put rocks, or if you actually had metal, that wasn't real common in Old Testament times, put that in the bottom, because then what you do, either your oxen walk around on the stalks that are laying there, or they pull the threshing sled, so it separates the chaff, the garbage, the stalk, from the grain. Then what you need to do is you need to really separate the chaff, so you have a winnowing fork. It looks kind of like a manure fork in a way. And so you take and you throw this stuff up, and this is where the wind is important, because the chaff, the garbage, is lighter than the grain. So as you throw it up, the garbage blows away, and the grain then remains on the floor. So while the oxen is working, threshing, don't muzzle them. Let the oxen eat while they're working. So Paul takes that verse and applies it to the labor is worthy of their wages. So don't be afraid to give these elders something. Yep. You can take that out of there too, right? Okay. And New Testament, I would argue that the New Testament also values the Torah. Jesus speaks highly of the Torah in the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew chapter 5, verses 17 and following. So Jesus says, don't think I came to abolish the law or the prophets. I didn't come to abolish, but to fulfill. For I say to you, until heaven and earth pass away, not the smallest letter or stroke will pass away from the law until all is accomplished. Paul likewise speaks highly of the law. Sometimes Paul makes some derogatory comments about law. And one of the questions we have to ask, is he referring to the law in the Old Testament or the oral law of the Pharisees? So sometimes it can be hard to distinguish. So again, argue that this is how we should view the law. So as we look at the law in the Old Testament, it's not bad. It might be confusing sometimes because we don't understand our Old Testaments very well, but it's meant to be applicable for us. So how do we take the underlying principle and put it into practice? Okay, comments, questions? Okie dokie. Well, then let us continue on with Deuteronomy. So, Deuteronomy, blah, blah, blah. Oh, we talked about, I think in your handout you have the whole eye for an eye thing. And sometimes we like to take that literally, but they argue that it really isn't meant to be taken literally. So if somebody gouges out your eye, don't go and try and gouge their eye out. That's not really, they argue what God is talking about. That wouldn't really totally go with the New Testament. But in that eye for eye, it's found in ancient Near Eastern laws too. So this is not just in the Old Testament, it's also found in ancient Near Eastern laws. And so the idea is the punishment must fit the crime. If you do something to someone, if you hit them in the shoulder, you can't like cut their arm off or something like if they hit you in the shoulder, you can't like cut their arm off or something. So the punishment has to fit the crime. It doesn't literally mean if somebody pokes your eye out, you get to poke their eye out. So it's suggested that the punishment must fit the crime. Okay, so what else do we have in Deuteronomy? We have curses and blessings. So if Israel would follow God, go to Deuteronomy 27. Deuteronomy 27, it's kind of cool because if Israel will follow God, then God will bless them. So all they have to do is diligently obey the Lord, and then all the blessings will come upon them. But if they don't obey the Lord, then there are a whole bunch of curses that come into play, and eventually they will be kicked out of their land and hauled off to another land. So that's kind of sad. Now, Moses doesn't get to go into the promised land, but he gets to look at it. So God in his grace allows Moses. So this is what Moses saw. God took him up on Mount Nebo, it says, and he showed him a view of the promised land. Now, they actually say that at Mount Nebo, you can actually see all the way to the Mediterranean Sea. So it would be like maybe 50 miles, because Mount Nebo is higher, and then the hills that you're looking at, they're lower, and it goes down. So when I was at Mount Nebo, we couldn't see the Mediterranean Sea, but that's what they say, you can. So in other words, God lets Moses look at the land that he has promised to the Israelites. And then Moses dies, and God buries him. Okay. Comments? Okie dokie. Well, then let us move on to Joshua. So Joshua. So you have a handout on Joshua through the United Monarchy. It looks sort of like this. And so Joshua, it should say Joshua United Monarchy. I know, sorry, they got a little bit stapled, not totally together. Yep. Okay. So Joshua. Okay. So Joshua covers, it's already written in your handout, covers about 20 years, two big sections. So they have to conquer the land and divide the land. We talked about Joshua's call. We talked a little teeny bit. So Joshua's call, we talked about God telling Joshua to be strong and courageous, right? So he is to be strong and courageous. And look at Joshua 1. Look at verse 8. And so what is he supposed to do? So the book of the law, so he is to pay attention, right, to the Torah that's there. Meditate on it day and night so that he will be careful to do according to all that's written in it. For then you will make your way prosperous, then you will have success. Have I not commanded you, be strong and courageous? Do not tremble or be dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you will go. Okay, so that's his charge. He's the one, he's been commissioned. He takes the place of Moses, the position that Moses had. He is a leader of the people. So we've already talked somewhat about Rahab and the spies. So Joshua sends spies to check out Jericho, the land across the Jordan River, do some reconnaissance. And they stay with Rahab. Now, what is Rahab? How's she described in verse 1? Yeah, she's described as a harlot, a prostitute. Why do the spies go to see a prostitute? Did they need her services? Yeah, right. So, no, they don't need her services. I'm going to argue that they didn't really do that. But where else would strange men go? That's kind of her business, right? You have men that come and go and have sex. So it makes sense that they would go there. We could argue that God led them there because they actually have a pretty decent conversation with Rahab, right? So we did talk a little bit, I think, already about the king of Jericho. Asked Rahab where the men went. She lies. And she had actually hidden them on her roof where she had flax up there. And so she says, I don't know where they are, but they went out when it was time to shut the gate. So pursue them quickly, for you will overtake them. Verse 5. And so that's what they do. So then she goes up and has a conversation, verses 9 and 10 and 11, and says, man, we heard what you did, what you guys have done. And we talked about this, heard about how your Lord dried up the waters of the Yam Suf like 40 years earlier. And verse 11, bottom line, we're not going to win. Okay, we're going to lose. Okay. So, what does... and look at the verse, end of verse 11. For the Lord your God, he is God in heaven above and on earth beneath. So, this is what I'm looking for. Okay, when you defeat our city, spare me, my father, my mother, my brothers, my sisters, and all who belong to them. And so the men agreed to that. So she lets them down by a rope, verse 15, through the window because her house was on the city wall. So they had different ways of constructing walls in those days. And one of the ways that you could construct a wall is you'd have two hollow walls, here, and then you would put houses between them. Now, if you had your house on the city wall, would that be one of the safer places? No, why not? Right? Because anybody that's attacking you, you're going to be the first to go. So it was, a little bit of the lower rent property than if you were a little bit further in. Now, how big is Jericho again? It's only 10 acres, okay? So it's not a huge city. Now, okay, so that is Rahab. And so as long as her whole family is in her house when the Israelites go to conquer, they're good to go. So they had to cross the Jordan River. So in chapter 3, they set out. And so when the priests put their feet in the water, it is going to quit flowing down. And so in verses 14 and following, that's exactly what happens. So the priest put their feet in the water. Now notice, it tells us the Jordan overflows its banks all the days of the harvest. So this is actually in the spring. So over in Israel, they harvest their grain crops in the spring. They plant them in the fall. They have the rainy season. They harvest them in the spring. The figs, the grapes, etc., they're harvested in the summer. So there's a lot of water in the Jordan, okay? But it is going to stop, and so you're going to have a little wall of water on your side, right? Just like Moses and the Israelites. The water separated, but this is a river, so you're not going to have any water going down. So you're going to be able to see, maybe look at a few fish swimming in there, right? No, where does it say the river stopped? Up. Look at verse 16. The river quits. You guys have something like Adam? Uh-huh. Yeah, so it's no longer flowing down from Adam. So towards the Salt Sea is a Dead Sea. Now, where is Adam? Okay, so on this map, you can see Jericho is down there. So Adam is like somewhere in this general vicinity where you have the Jordan River. If I make it big enough, it'll be in the general vicinity. Okay, see that Jordan River up there? Oh, you can't see my little thing. Oh, sorry. Okay, so you see the Jordan River on that side? Okay, somewhere ballpark it around there. Quite a ways, in other words, north of where Joshua and the Israelites are. So why do the rivers not flow down from Adam? What's there that causes them to stop there? Why don't they flow? Why don't they quit right where Israel is so that they can see, just like the Dead Sea? Could God use nature to accomplish his purposes? Yeah, he could. Okay, so if he used nature, what might this have looked like? Well, it says they stopped at the fords of Adam. And do you know what happens at the fords of Adam? Well, Israel is on the great African Rift Valley, okay, where those tectonic plates come together. And so you have earthquakes there. And you also have, at Adam, you have mudslides at Adam. And they, like in the 1930s or so, somewhere ballpark in that time, they actually have recorded where there was a landslide at Adam, and it stopped the river up like for 8 hours. Could it be possible that God caused a landslide at Adam, and that's why the water didn't come down? Who is causing it if this is the way it worked? I mean, God's in control, right? He's the one that's doing it. How he does it, I mean, he could do however he wants, right? But it's interesting that there are known earthquake or known landslides that take place at Adam that they have recorded in history that actually block the Jordan River. And so then it takes a while, but eventually the water works its way through and then comes down. So maybe God used that to block the river. Is it still a miracle? Yeah, because it just so happened that when the priests put their feet in the water, it just so happened to not flow. Okay, now that would be a bit of a stretch to, yep. Okay, so that's what happened. So Israel goes across then on dry ground, and they take memorial stones. So one individual from each of the 12 tribes takes a stone from the middle of the Jordan River, and then they pile it up there on the other side, what they call as Gilgal. It's eventually named Gilgal, and they pile them up there. Why do they pile them up there? Because it's a memorial. So it's a reminder so that when your kids go by, you can tell them what happened. You know, sometimes when you drive along the road, it'll say memorial marker ahead. And if you have somebody that's just enamored with stopping at every single memorial marker, you can get greatly annoyed. Right? And so then the little memorial marker, it'll have, the history or whatever is a point of interest there. It's the same kind of things. These guys have rocks all over there. So now they can pile up rocks. And so when you come to this pile of rocks, then you can tell your children what took place there. Okay, so as we continue on and we go to chapter 5, the sad thing is that they didn't practice circumcision in the wilderness, and I really don't understand. I mean, in Genesis, it was like a huge thing. You circumcise your boys, that's a sign of the covenant. But for some reason in the wilderness, I don't know why they didn't do it, but so the men all have to be circumcised, and then they have to wait until they're healed before they can get ready to go and take the city. They celebrate the Passover, verse 11 of chapter 5, and they actually eat some produce of the land. So that's cool. So now they're not relying, verse 12, the manna ceases now, because now they can eat produce from the land God promised them.
Just recently read through here, and one of the things that popped out at me was if you go back into Genesis, where when they tried to redeem Dinah,
Mm-hmm.
and they had them all circumcised.
Mm-hmm.
And attacked them
Mm-hmm.
while they were
Mm-hmm.
just had been circumcised.
Mhm.
So not able to. But in Joshua 5, if you go up into verse 1, and it says about had dried up all the waters of the Jordan before the sons of Israel until they had crossed, and their hearts melted, and their vulnerable during this time, but God has done action, and the people that potentially would be attacking them have lost spirit. You know, they've been made to be afraid of the people. That really popped out at me when I read through there, how in reverse that works. Something I noticed.
No, God's pretty cool, isn't he? He gets it all worked out. That's cool. Cool. Thanks. Okay, so now they need to conquer Joshua. Joshua needs to conquer Jericho. Okay, so that's what he needs to do. And so God has this totally awesome battle strategy, right? So Joshua, this is what you're going to do to conquer the city. Okay, now you're going to walk around it once for how many days? Wait, 6 days you walk around it once, right? And then on the day 7, how many times you walk around it? 7 times, right? Okay, so this is cool. And then you're going to yell at it. That's a good plan, right? So if we wanted this church to come down, that's what we should do. We don't want this church to come down, but if we were going to take down a building, that would be a good battle strategy, right? Walk around it 6 times, once each day for 6 days. 7th day, walk around it 7 times and then yell at it, and it's going to fall over. Good plan, right? Right. Because didn't they build their cities? Their cities were fortified. Okay, they're not like little mud huts or something like that. They're fortified cities. They're strong cities. And they actually have discovered an ancient wall at Jericho, and it's a nice thick wall. So this isn't necessarily a wimpy wall. So it doesn't, excuse me, sorry. Thanks. It doesn't really, in a way, make sense, does it? Now, wouldn't you want God to have some fancy battle strategy for you? But this is God, right? I mean, he's got it planned out. And Joshua and the Israelites, what do? They actually do what God tells them to do, right? Okay, this is God's plan. What? Yes, isn't that kind of encouraging after what some of the things we've seen earlier, right? And Joshua obviously had to be a good leader because those people followed him. They did what he said God said for them to do. So they do exactly that. And then on the 7th day, they get up early and they march around the city 7 times. And then they blow the trumpet and shout. In verse 20, the wall falls down, well, my Bible says flat, or in its place. Now, some people will suggest, so at Adam, if it's true that there was an earthquake, what did God use to take out then the walls of Jericho? He sent another earthquake. Now, could God do that? Would it take away from God's glory if he did? No, because when the people yelled, it went down, right? So either God just touched it, zapped it, and made it go down, or he used nature that he has created and caused an earthquake to happen at that point strong enough that it would take down the walls. So however it happens, Israel is successful. Now, there's a difficult thing that we come to. Oh, well, before we go, why did God have them start at Jericho? Because when the spies went through the land, they kind of followed those arrows that go up and down. They didn't go on the backside of the Jordan River, the eastern side of the Jordan River. So why does God have the Israelites go through Jericho? Because it's a back door. And is your back door as heavily guarded as your front door? not usually, right? And so we have seen that the Israelites sometimes are a little lacking in faith. So the main highway would be along the coast, the Mediterranean coast. That's where the main highway is. And the superpowers would want to control the main highway, like Egypt, countries connected with Mesopotamia, Babylon, Assyria, the Hittite kingdom that's in modern day, in the area of modern day Turkey. They're all traveling back and forth. Egypt was a very popular country. And also you have traders coming from the east that are coming to the coast, the Mediterranean coast. And some may go south to Egypt, some may go north, some may get on ships on the coast. So you have the people that are strong are going to control the intercoastal highway. The back door, not so much. So it's not as heavily fortified. Again, Jericho was 10 acres, so it's not this massive, massive, massive city. So it suggested, that's why God had the Israelites go through the back door, come in this way. Now, God tells them to utterly destroy everything. Everything. Verse 21. So look at Joshua 6:21. So they're supposed to destroy man and woman, young and old, ox and sheep and donkey with the edge of the sword. How young is young? Is there an age cutoff for young? It's little kids? It's babies? How can God tell Joshua and the Israelites to slaughter all those people? Doesn't it seem a little harsh? See, again, the God of the Old Testament is just crabby. And the God of the New Testament is love, right? God is love. That's what we read in 1 John, right? And somewhere in the middle, that white page between our Old and New Testaments, God had a little bit of a change of heart. So it became a little nicer, a lot nicer in the New Testament than in the Old Testament, right? And New Testament has Revelation. I know. And a few other passages here and there, right? So why does God have them kill everybody? So hold your place. Well, we're going to come back to Joshua 6. Go to Deuteronomy chapter 20. Deuteronomy chapter 20. And here God gives instructions for what you should do in the future when you go out to battle. So, there are different instructions depending on whether the city you are fighting against is near you, i.e., in the land that God has promised to you, or far from you, i.e., outside of the land that God has promised to give you. So, the first set of instructions in verses 10 and following are for the cities that are far away. So when you approach a city to fight against it, you should offer it terms of peace. If it agrees to make peace with you, then they will become forced labor for you. However, if it doesn't, then you go in, you besiege it, and you kill all the men. The women, the children, the animals, and all that's in the city, its spoil, you will take as plunder for yourself, and you will use the spoil of your enemies, which the Lord your God has given you. Thus you shall do to all the cities that are far away. Now, what about verse 16? The cities in these peoples that the Lord your God has given you as an inheritance, you shall not leave alive anything that breathes, but you shall utterly destroy them. The Hivite, the Amorite, the Canaanite, the Perizzite, the Hivite, blah, 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 all these people. So they will not. Now, why do you take them out completely? Look at verse 18. So they may not teach you to do according to all their detestable things which they have done for their gods, so that you would sin against the Lord God. So, why the difference? If they're far away, you can offer them peace. If they're in your land, you have to take them out. What is the land of Israel supposed to be?
Holy.
Yes, holy, right? A land that is sold out to God, that reflects God's values. How can you have that if you have all these pockets where foreign deities are being worshipped? You can't. So if the city is close by, is within the land that God has promised you, you need to take it out. You need to put everything under the ban. They're devoted to Yahweh, they're devoted to the Lord. In this case, they're devoted to destruction. Now, doesn't that seem kind of harsh? Babies, we're talking babies. We're talking toddlers. Grown-ups, we could live with that. They made a choice. Babies, toddlers, small children, they haven't made any choices, have they? So why do they die? If you get killed in the battle of Jericho, you're going to go straight to hell, right? Huh? Yeah, exactly. Where's your heart? Rahab, she was sensitive to the Lord, right? She's a Canaanite. She's going to be saved. Why? Because she put her eggs in God's basket. So if you are killed in the battle of Jericho, but you are sensitive to the Lord, where are you going to spend eternity? So again, God is going to make the call. Now back in Genesis 15, remember, he said the Israelites couldn't have the land yet because the sin of the Amorite, the people who are living in the land, wasn't yet complete. And he said your people are going to be enslaved for 400 years. That's a long time, right? So God is giving the people living there a chance to clean things up. They don't. And so now it's time for Joshua and the Israelites to come in and take them out. Again, just because you die in this battle, I will argue that you don't necessarily go straight to hell. It depends on where your heart is with what you know about God. Now, Israel gets in the land. They conquer the land. They take the land. What happens to them? They are deadbeats in their relationship with God. So what does God do? Raises up the Assyrians. They take out the northern kingdom. Raises up the Babylonians. They take out the southern kingdom. Okay, so God doesn't play favorites. You don't listen to God. Eventually, you're going to go down. And so Joshua and the Israelites take out the people that are living in the land. And God eventually will raise somebody else up to take out Israel and Judah because they're not listening to God. I don't know. I still think it's hard because I have a hard time thinking about babies, toddlers being killed in this battle. But I don't think God is a mean God. He's a just God. He has a plan. He's working. He's got his big picture. And so he's working it. So if the city is there, the goal for Israel, it's not up. So the goal for Israel, that's not a big picture. What is God's goal for Israel? It is to be a land, and Isaiah talks about a light to the nations. And remember, they have this major highway that goes through them. And so lots of people are going to be coming through here, both north, south, and east, west. And so if they are a people who worships and serves God, think of the testimony they can have as people come through their land because they have to. okay, because they want to trade, communicate with different people. They would see a people that is sold out to their God, and they could have a huge impact on the people going through. And so, in order for that to happen, you can't have, the Bible uses like leaven sometimes. You can't have anything that will pollute the country, right? Because it will affect the witness. And you all know the end of the story. Israel did not remain faithful to God. She allowed all sorts of garbage to come in, and it affected who she was. And so then God had to take her out. So I think sometimes we have to look back at the big picture and what is God trying to do, and this is what he's doing. If he loves people, then how will he treat those people whom he loves? And it's more than just the Canaanites or the Israelites. He loves everybody, I'd argue. So there are things that are cherem, it's called. They're devoted to God and often carries the idea of utter destruction. It's used in other, they found something from Moab that has the same word, the same idea in there, devoted to destruction. Now, silver, gold, bronze, and iron are supposed to go into the treasury of the Lord. So then Joshua does some campaigns, conquers some areas, but it's kind of like a not really hit and run, I don't know, strike, attack, and then go back to home base, because they don't stay, after they conquer these areas, it doesn't record that they stayed in them at this point. In chapter 7, though, they go to fight against a little city called Ai. So the little city, so you can see Ai up there, and they get slaughtered. They don't think they have to take many men there because it's not a very big city, so they just take a few men and they get beat. And so Joshua turns to the Lord and says, what's going on? And somebody took something that was under the ban. And so they have to figure out who. And so they cast lots, break it down by tribes, clans, families. I forget exactly the order it goes. And so finally they come to Achan. And Achan was chosen. And so verse 19 of chapter 7, Joshua says, tell what you have done, don't hide it. Achan says, I sinned against the Lord. I saw, verse 21, a beautiful mantle, garment from Shinar, 200 shekels of silver, a bar of gold, 50 shekels in weight. I coveted them, took them, and hid them in my tent. And so they bring it out, and all Israel, verse 25, stones them with stones. Again, God is responsible for where they spend eternity. Now, why does Israel lose a battle because one guy sins? It's not fair, is it? I mean, people died in that battle. People lost their husbands, their brothers, their sons in that battle because of what Achan did. It's the idea of corporate solidarity, okay? Israel is a group. Israel is a unit. So what one person does affects the rest of the unit. So Achan sinned, that affects Israel as a whole. They are a corporate group. It's like if you go over to some countries and you tell them you're an American, they'll hate you. Doesn't matter if you're sympathetic to their cause or not, they'll hate you because you're an American, because you are a corporate part of America. And obviously in our country we're very individualistic, so we don't think like that, but this is how they thought. And so when Joshua and the Israelites then go and fight the battle again, they win because the sin has been dealt with. Okay, so let's continue. We'll finish Joshua. And, you know, there's a lot of stuff in here, but let us go to the end of Joshua. And at the end of Joshua, Joshua's old, and he talks to his people in Joshua 24, and reminds the people, challenges the people to not serve other deities. Verse 15, or verse 14, we'll start in 14. Fear the Lord, revere the Lord, serve him in sincerity and truth. Put away the gods which your ancestors served beyond the river, i.e. the Euphrates, and in Egypt, and serve the Lord. If it's disagreeable in your sight to serve the Lord, choose for yourselves today whom you will serve, whether the gods your ancestors served, which were beyond the river, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you are living. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. So the people agree that what they need to do is serve God. They are going to be faithful to the Lord. And we are told that Joshua and the Israelites remained faithful to the Lord all the days of the elders which survived Joshua. Okay, so we didn't talk about the Gibeonites, but you could read about that. So the Gibeonites faked out Joshua and pretended that they were from a far, far, far country. Joshua didn't, the elders, they didn't turn to the Lord and ask for wisdom. At this point, the Gibeonites were right there in the midst of their territory. Next map here. You see where Gibeon is by that diagonal black line? So they pretended they were from a long, long, long ways away, and they weren't. They were right there, but Joshua and the Israelites made an agreement with them, and so they couldn't destroy them, but they made them like water carriers, hewers of wood. They made them their servants. Okay, so then we'll take a break in like 15 minutes, okay? That's when we said we'd take a break. Wait, did we say we'd take a break now? Oh, no, we said we'd take a break now, so take a break, okay? About 15 minutes, okay? And then we'll come and finish Judges Ruth in the United Monarchy.
Mine can only endure as much as the seat can stand, or something like that. An old saying, something.
Oh, sure. You don't mind. That'd be very kind of you.
What time was this supposed to finish? 4:30.
Okay. Thank you, Dan. That's good. Guess I talk too much. I don't usually talk this much quite so long. Have to spice it up a little here, so we don't all die. Maybe we can reenact some battle or something. Yeah. 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 I know. Yeah. When we went to Israel to see this last time, we had it was not this January, but the January before. 22. Must have been, yeah. Yeah. And so we went to the Elah Valley where David and Goliath's battle was. So we had a little skinny guy, and we had a taller guy. And so the little skinny guy got on the taller guy's shoulders, and so he was Goliath. And I forget who was David. So it was cool. So we enacted David and Goliath. I think maybe one of the ladies was David. Maybe yeah. So that was funny because then when the stone was slung, the little guy, I mean, he falls off. They did a great job. He just goes down.
So everybody there remember that.
Oh, they do. They remember that. Yeah, that was one of their highlights of their trip. Yep. So, yeah. So it was kind of funny. Yeah, it is. So.
Are you going with a particular company or group?
Dale Peterson, remember? Yeah. He did Friendly Planet though, and so I use Friendly Planet when I do my things. So
Still
there.
do it too?
He used to. I don't know if he still is, because I went with him initially because I'd never done it before. So I went with him a couple times, yeah, and learned kind of how it's done. And then, then he didn't go for a little bit. So I don't know if he's still going or not. I'm not sure. Yeah, I just know he's still.
I looked at it online one time. Probably back during COVID.
Oh yeah.
I don't know when you he used to act out stuff. He used to
Yeah.
talk to somebody.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah.
Not that nobody did that.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Cool. Yes.
I can't do the song about it.
No, but that. Yes.
No, but having kindness of right?
Oh yes.
Body blown fish. We shouldn't eat shrimp. Because in the Old Testament they were considered unclean, and they were really. Anyway, when you showed that, I was like, Dale Peterson totally came to my mind.
That's funny. Yeah, he was really big on the health kick.
For a while.
Yeah, he looked really good. Yeah.
Anyway, that's funny.
That's funny. Oh yeah.
Shouldn't be.
Yeah. You feel guilty? I don't feel guilty. I still eat shrimp once in a while. So it is kind of funny. That's cool. Yeah, as far as I know, he's still out there. He and his wife. Yeah, she went. I think she went once when I went with Dale. So I got to, spend a little time with him, a little bit. Yeah. So it's cool. Have you been to Israel?
Because we've traveled since I retired. Now we've traveled.
Yeah.
Been over there for half the time.
Yeah.
Just kind of incense cathedrals are just.
Oh yes. 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 No. Yes.
I want to go to Spain next and see what's it called?
Oh, really?
Sagrada, whatever. I don't know.
Oh, okay. I
Obviously,
don't
to
know.
get that down.
Yeah.
So I know where I'm going.
Yeah,
but
that would be helpful.
we weren't.
Oh, I took art history. I had a couple of friends at BSU, and one of them was an art major, and she was in art history. So I took art history for 2 semesters, and the guy, he was cool. His name was Crocker. He was a funny guy, but he was very passionate and animated, and he had all these slides of those things. And he just talked about how they, built them to honor. I mean, that was obviously their intent, but just to honor God and the architecture and all those kinds of things. And yeah, I agree. I mean, yeah. Right. Yes. Yes. I agree. Yeah, because you're not worshiping. Because it's sad that they really didn't, at least at some point, they forgot who God was. That's sad. But, right, it is amazing sometimes what people can do. It's just awesome. I did. I took. Oh, because my art friend said, "Oh, you should take a class." They said you should take a class. And so I said, "Okay, so I'll take art history with you." And I got an A in both of them because it was history and it was pictures. She's an artist, okay? So I think she got a B. She was not happy, and I got a better grade than she did. That was funny. Yeah, but the guy talked about history. He talked about the kings that were around. He talked about the cultural background, and then talked about how the thing fit in there. And so, yeah, I couldn't draw anything for nothing, but yeah. So that was funny. Yeah, it was pretty cool.
Yeah, this is where we were in Amsterdam. We went to the Rijksmuseum, right? The Rijksmuseum here. The guy that did our tour was an art major, and he could stand in the picture and just tell you about this light like that.
Oh, really?
He just brought it to life.
Oh,
Just
cool.
like that.
Yes.
Because I can look at him and I can appreciate it.
Yeah,
I
right.
can't know.
No.
So that it really kind of, anyways,
Wow.
whatever.
Yes.
You know that stuff. I
Yeah.
know that stuff.
Yes. It is. It's cool, and it can make it just come to life. It's so cool. Yes. And it's like what we talk about for biblical history. Obviously those guys have enough information that they can really fill in the cracks, and so they can make it come to life. And we have to do that more with the Bible as much as we can, because think of all we miss when we just if I looked at a picture, I wouldn't see all that stuff, but it's there to the original audience, and it just makes it, like you said, just so much fuller.
Slowly getting through a book like
But the basics.
Oh, yeah.
the guy's name.
Is it Bailey?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
It's about No Room in the Inn and how we think about it. Little plays about staying in the inn.
Yes.
And he's like,
Yeah.
They can't be animals.
Yes.
Somebody staying in the
Yes.
section. Was my favorite one.
Yes.
Barn.
Yes.
I was like, oh my goodness.
Yes.
Never would I know that.
Yes.
Super
Yes. It is.
So I'm slowly nursing through that book.
Oh no! Well, that's a loaded book. Yeah. When you go to Bethlehem, they have a bunch of caves around there. So they said that some people would even live in caves, and so then maybe Mary and Joseph got the back of the cave, or Mary gave birth to Jesus in the back of the cave. And there was probably other ladies. It probably wasn't necessarily Joseph helping with the birth, because there would have been other women that would have. Yeah.
In fact, he even speaks of who gave us that and how we just run with it. Like it's all our Christmas plays. Or,
Oh, yeah.
who he said made that up.
Oh, really? He does? Yeah? Okay. Yep. Yeah. Well, in our Christmas cards, you see Joseph and Mary's on the donkey and all that kind of stuff, and just the two of them. And there's no way.
So there's probably a whole
Yes, caravan.
chosen,
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, exactly. I know, really different than what we think.
I've heard difference.
That makes sense why they lost Jesus,
yeah.
when he's 12. 'Cause-
Exactly.
Yep. It does, doesn't it?
Yeah, I agree. No, I don't know. Is it? Oh, well, I'll go and make sure I know what I'm going to talk about. No, it's small. Really, that's just 4 city blocks. Like our town, Bemidji, the size we have. Uh-huh, uh-huh. Yeah, 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 it's small. It is. I know. Israel's just tiny. From Jerusalem to the top of the Sea of Galilee at Capernaum, it's only 90 miles. You know? So it's, yes, 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 yes. I know. That's cool. Yeah.
Not really with the Old Testament here, but all. Are you? I just was wondering your take on, the book called The Story
Oh, yes, I've heard
by
of it. Uh-huh.
Randy Frazee and Max Lucado,
Okay, yes,
where they've just taken
yes.
40 key ideas and then they've taken scripture, but they haven't put any verses in.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry, I've heard of it, but I've never actually even looked at it.
Oh, really?
No, 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 no. So,
Well, I was mentioning it to one of the guys in the church here, and he'd never seen it, read it before. And he just really gave me the feedback that it was just so special and helpful.
yes, 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 yes,
It
yes.
was a way of introducing people to scriptures without having them feel overwhelmed.
Yep, 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 yep. No, that makes sense. And hopefully give them a hunger for a little more.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes, yes, yes.
Yeah, this was curious.
Yeah, no, I've heard of it, but I don't know that I ever really, maybe if I looked at it for like 2 minutes or something, but I haven't ever really sat down and looked at it in detail.
The story itself, I think that was done in the NIV. And there was a companion guide
Ah,
done by
okay.
Randy Frazee.
Yep, yep, yep. Cool. No, I'm sorry, I'm not, but I'm sure it would be good. Max Lucado is good at that, and
Randy Frazee was the one that really initiated it, but they worked together on the same team in
yeah,
the church.
yeah. Oh, okay, okay. Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's good.
Maybe some.
Yes, yes, yes. I'll have to check that out. Yes, yes, yes. Okay, well, we'll get started. So, one last session. Yeah, yay, right? I know, it gets a little long. I probably should do more song and dance or something to liven it up. But okay, so now we're going to look at the Judges. So in the book of Judges, we have these individuals that they are called judges. And what is a judge? It's not like we think of a judge. It's really a charismatic military leader. Not a charismatic person in the sense that they're raising your hands and speaking in tongues, like we talk about charismatics today, but they have charisma and people will follow them. Okay? And the book of Judges is really about the need for a king. Israel, the author of Judges, thinks needs a king. Now, in the book of Judges, it talks about the land that remains. So when we read the book of Joshua, and how much land did Joshua conquer? Did he conquer the whole land? No, he didn't conquer the whole land. There were chunks that were left. So this map shows the land that remains. In Judges, you can see in Judges 1, it lists various places that the Israelites did not capture. And notice where it is. It's all along the sea, okay?
And so that's where your intercoastal highway would run. So you can see the Mount Carmel angles down. As you go through the Carmel Pass, you could go north. That was a little rougher route. Or you could cut in. So Israel didn't control that. They didn't control the area of the Jezreel Valley. That's where it says, if you can see Canaanite Egyptians. Again, that's angled across there. Goes from the sea over to the valley, the Jordan River Valley. So they didn't control that. And then the area north and south of the Sea of Galilee, they did not conquer that. They also did not conquer what is later known as Jerusalem. Now, why couldn't they conquer those places? Did God not give them those places? Is this part of the land that God promised to Abraham and Sarah? Yeah. Yes, it's part of the land that God promised to Abraham and Sarah, so why couldn't they take them? What do you know? Where are the main routes? Where is the major highway? This is where the major highway, the branches of the major highway run. Along the coast is the intercoastal highway. Okay, that is the interstate of that area. You cut in and you continue north. There are a few passes through the Carmel Range. So you go through one of those passes. Again, you can go west and then north along the coast, or you can go east through the Jezreel Valley. You see Beit Shean there. So that's over along the Jordan River Valley that goes between the Dead Sea and the Sea of Galilee. So you cut in over there, and then you go north you can go over to Damascus or get over through the Fertile Crescent to go to Mesopotamia. So they never conquered the areas that the big guns would want. Could they have conquered the areas? Yeah, of course they could have conquered them, right? But they didn't. So Joshua sometimes seems like they went in and conquered the whole land and it was all Israel's. No, even in the book of Joshua, it talks about land that they did not take. So they did some lightning strikes in the beginning, and eventually they pushed their way in. And for the most part, you can see what they get. The hill country of Judah, the hill country further north, that wasn't as heavily populated. And then they go up into Galilee and get the hill country there. Now, the book of Judges, it can be kind of depressing in a way because it has this cycle. You get the sin, judgment, repentance, and deliverance cycle. So, for example, let us look at Judges. What one do we want to look at? Well, okay, let's go to Judges chapter 3, verse 9. So Judges 3:9. Wait, we have to go to verse 7. So start in verse 7. Judges 3:7. So the children of Israel did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, forgot the Lord their God, and served the Baals and the Asherah. So what does Israel do? They sin. Okay, then what does the Lord do? Okay, so the anger of the Lord is kindled against Israel. He sells them into the hands of this dude Cushan-Rishathaim, king of Mesopotamia, and the children of Israel served this dude for 8 years. So God judges the people. What does Israel do? When the children of Israel cried out to the Lord raised up a deliverer for the children of Israel to deliver them. And in this case, it's Othniel. So the Israelites repent. God raises up a deliverer. So as we go through the book of Judges, and we go through in particular the major judges, and the next slide is the major judges, I'll show it in a minute, you get this cycle. Israel sins, God judges them, Israel decides they better repent because things aren't going so well, God sends a deliverer, i.e. a judge, and then it starts over again. So Judges is divided, scholars divide it into major and minor. All it means is you have more written about you if you're a major judge. Just like we have the major prophets and the minor prophets. The major prophets, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Daniel is included in there, although it's not as long as the other ones, so they're longer. They're called major because they're bigger. Minor are smaller. So 13 chapters or smaller for the minor prophets. Some are only, Obadiah is only 1 chapter. So the major judges are the ones we know the most about. Othniel, we don't really know much about, but he is related to Caleb. And so I think that's probably why he's included as a major judge. Okay, so how many of you are lefties? Any lefties out there? Oh, so 2 lefties. Okay, so we'll look at Ehud. Okay, so Ehud, he's a lefty. And who really cares that he's a lefty? Well, it's kind of significant in this particular story. Okay, so verse 12, the Israelites do evil in the sight of the Lord. So the Lord strengthens this dude named Eglon. He's a king of Moab, and so he fights against Israel. And so they end up serving Eglon, the king of Moab, for 18 years. Now then the children of Israel, they cry to the Lord. And so the Lord raises a deliverer, Ehud. Okay, so they send Eglon, king of Moab, tribute, and they bring it to Jericho. That's where they bring it to. So Ehud is going to go visit the guy, and he makes himself a sword. So he makes himself a 2-edged sword, cubit, which they say is about 18 inches, and he puts it on his right thigh under his cloak. And then he goes to visit Eglon. And so he brings him what he's supposed to bring him, then turns back. And then he says, oh, hey, king, verse 19, I have a secret message for you. Shh. Okay, and so the king says, shh. Okay. And so the king has everybody leave. And so then Ehud comes to Eglon and says, I have a message from God for you. And so he gets up and stretches out his left hand and grabs his sword and stabs Eglon. Now, why is it significant that he is a lefty? Because most people are righties, right? Yes, because you would be caught off guard. Now, some suggest that left-handed means he was ambidextrous. He could use both of his hands. But he had to do something to fake out the guy. So whether he was a total lefty or not, he must have used his right hand so that Eglon wouldn't think he was a lefty. Because if you're looking for a sword and you're a righty, you're going to expect your sword over here, right? Not over here. So he fakes him out, and that's the end of Eglon. And so then they fight against these people, the Moabites, and they are successful. And so they have peace, it says, for 80 years. Okay, the next judge. Now, for the most part, the judges are we see judges, they're the ones that actually fight the battle. This judge is different. So Deborah is a prophet. We are told in verse 4 that Deborah is a prophet, and she judged Israel. And she would sit under the palm tree of Deborah. And so the children of Israel, would come to her for judgment. So she would judge their cases. So she's a little bit more like a judge when we think of a judge, in that she judges cases. Now, she summons a guy named Barak, that's from up north, and says, the Lord, verse 6, God of Israel has commanded, go march to Mount Tabor, take with you 10,000 men from the sons of Naphtali and from the sons of Zebulun. I will draw out to you Sisera, the commander of Jabin's army, to the river Kishon, and I will give him into your hands. Verse 8, Barak says, I'm not going if you're not going. Now, what's the matter with Barak? Is he a wimp? He needs a woman to support him? Right. Now, some people will criticize Barak and say he was a wimp. But who is the one that's hearing from God? Deborah, right? And it wasn't necessarily, armies in this time would bring prophets with them sometimes. Why would you bring a prophet with you when you're fighting a battle? Can they wield a sword? Not necessarily. Can they shoot the bazooka? Not necessarily. So why on earth would you bring a prophet? Because who are they in communication with? Okay? The deity. So Deborah is the one that heard from God, calls Barak down and said, look, this is what God says you should do. So I would tend to see Barak as being a smart man because she's hearing from the Lord about this battle. So he wants her to go with. So Deborah says, not a problem, I will, but the honors will not be yours. The Lord will sell Sisera into the hands of a woman. Okay, so they go up north. Well, do you see Gideon in red at the top of the map? So Deborah, her home base is further south, but they need to fight the battle up north in the Jezreel Valley area. So Gideon is up there. Mount Tabor is north of Gideon. So that's where the battle's going to be, in the Jezreel Valley, in that area. So Baruch calls together the troops, and he's hanging out on Mount Tabor. Now, Mount Tabor, it's kind of cool because it looks like someone packed a bunch of earth in a soup bowl and then plopped it down, took the bowl off. It's this nice rounded hill. So he is up there on Mount Tabor. Now, did we say that Sisera had 900? Oh, look at verse 13. Sisera has how many iron chariots? Yeah, like 900 it says. So again, numbers, maybe that would be, I don't think you could actually maneuver if you actually had 900 chariots in the Jezreel Valley. But he had a wad of chariots. How many did, what's his name, have, Barak? Didn't say he had one, right? Zilch, nada, nothing. So who has the better force? Who should win? The guy with the tanks, right? They should win. So, and Barak is on Mount Tabor, where he's safe from the chariots, because chariots aren't so good on mountains. Now, Deborah, in verse 14, tells Barak, hey, get up, it's time to go fight the battle. Now, go down and fight the battle. Oh, that was not a good move, because now you've lost your advantage. You have an advantage when you're in the mountain. Now you're down in the flat, where the chariots are the better battle instrument. But God knows what he's doing. And verse 15, the Lord routed Sisera and all his chariots and all his army before Barak. And so Sisera flees. And Barak and his army takes out then the rest of Sisera's army. So Sisera runs east. Okay, so he runs that way. And we were told earlier that Heber the Kenite pitched his tent over there in that area. And we are told now in verse 17 that there's peace between Jabin the king of Hatzor and the house of Heber the Kenite. So Jael, who is a wife of Heber the Kenite, is in her tent at home. And she goes out to meet Sisera and says, hey, turn aside. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. She's very good at this in this instance. So the guy turns aside. Now, he's been fighting a battle. He's tired. He's running. So probably thinks that this is a good place for him to rest and get away from those who are pursuing him. Okay, so he goes into her tent. She covers him up with a blanket. And he asks for a little bit of water because he's thirsty. Okay, that makes sense. She gives him a bottle of milk and gives him a drink. Why does she give him milk? He asks for water. You sleep better with milk, don't you? So maybe she gave him milk because she wanted him to fall asleep and sleep well. Because, okay, well, we're not there yet. So, verse 20, then he says, stand in the doorway of the tent. If anybody comes and says, is anybody here, just say no. Okay, so whatever. Then we get to verse 21. What does Jael do? She takes a tent peg. Now, they say they're probably about yay long. She takes a hammer. Okay, they lived in tents, so she's used to wielding a hammer, right? She'd need to be putting up tents, help them put them up, take them down. And she goes in to Sisera and drives a peg into his temple, and it actually went through the ground. He was sound asleep and exhausted, so he dies. Now, so you have this general of the Canaanites laying here, and you have your tent peg and you have your hammer, and you need to pound this thing in the guy's temple. That means you're going to have to get down next to him, right? So you're going to have to kneel down. So his head's here. You're going to have to make sure that your first blow is a good one, right? Because if you kind of miss and the guy wakes up, you're toast. I mean, think of this lady. She had to have some guts, right? So she takes, bam, bam, whatever the guy is done for. He's dead. And so Barak comes and Jael says, hey, I have the guy you're looking for. Now, how is it that Barak and the Israelites were so successful against the massive amount of chariots that Sisera had? Because ideally they should lose. Jezreel Valley is a nice valley, nice flat, great place for fighting with chariots. Look at Judges chapter 5. So Judges chapter 5, it talks in verse 4. It makes mention of, it talks about the Lord when you went out from Seir to the east, when you marched from the field of Edom. The earth quaked, the heavens also dripped, even the clouds dripped water. And then in verse 19, the kings came and fought. They fought the kings of Canaan. At Ta'anach, near the waters of Megiddo, they took no plunder in silver. The stars fought from heaven. From their courses they fought against Sisera. The torrent of Kishon swept them away. The ancient torrent, the torrent Kishon. O my soul, march on with strength. So it suggested that what actually happened here, why does it talk about the torrent Kishon? The torrent is the Kishon is not normally a raging torrent. Now it is if it rains. And so it suggested that what took place is that God sent rain. Now, what happens, the torrent flows to, or the Kishon flows to the Mediterranean Sea. So it flows like northwest to the Mediterranean Sea. And when it gets close to the sea, there's a little sill, a little bump. So it plugs it up. It can't drain as fast as it comes through. And so then the water backs up. What happens, you have a nice fertile field, and now it's full of water. You get mud. How good are chariots in your mud? Not really, right? And so it suggested that one of the things that God did is he sent rain, and so the chariots were then ineffective So he, in that manner, fought against. So Deborah was a judge, and the land was undisturbed for 40 years. So Gideon, you know about Gideon, right? What did Gideon do? He's the guy with the fleece and the trumpets and the jars. Remember, he lays out a fleece, and he says, okay, needs to know if God is with him. So he says, okay, God, if the fleece is wet and the ground is dry, I know you are with me. But that actually happens, and he said, wait, can we do this again? Why does he want to do it again? Now he wants the fleece to be dry and the ground be wet. What difference does it make? Okay, you've been camping, have you? You know, and it rains inevitably, and your sleeping bag is soaked, and you don't have one of those newfangled one that dries in 4 seconds. You have some old thing that soaks up water like and you lay your sleeping bag out to dry, and the sun comes out. What's going to dry faster, your soggy sleeping bag or the ground around it? Yeah, the ground around it, right? Not your soggy sleeping bag. A fleece will hold a lot of water, okay? So he did it wrong the first time. Okay, that's the way it normally will work. The fleece will be wet, the ground will be dry. So he switches. I need to know if you're with me. So if the fleece is dry and the ground is wet, that's not normal. And so Gideon then is willing to go fight the battle that God gives him to fight. And he's supposed to fight the Midianites, and it says that there's like a bazillion Midianites out there. And do you remember? He has like a bundle of men, a whole wad of men. I forget how many, but like 20,000 or something. 32,000 soldiers he has to fight against this innumerable wad of Midianites. And what does God say? You have too many. Okay, no, God, we don't have too many. And so they have to do, anybody that's afraid, go ahead and go back home. So now Gideon is down to 10,000, and he's fighting this innumerable band of Midianites. So what does God say again? Too many, too many. So then it's, how do you drink your water? And so verse 7, the people that lapped, those are the ones, those little 300 over 6, they lapped, they put their hand to their mouth. 300. Okay, 300 against how many Midianites? It's like there's wads of them. Who's going to win? Just do the math, right? Obviously, the Midianites are going to win because they're outnumbered. The Israelites are, I don't know, about 50, 100, or 200 to 1, something like that. It's just totally weird. So, does God have a plan? Of course, God has a plan. He wants Gideon to trust him, obviously, and Gideon, to his credit, does. So he goes down in the camp, and he gets a little boost because one guy down there, Midianite, had a dream with this barley bread tumbled into the camp, and it struck the camp of Midian, the tent, so that it fell, and the tent lay flat. And his friend says, oh, wow, this is the sword of Gideon. God has given Midian and all the camp into his hands. And so Joshua gives everybody a trumpet, a torch, and a pitcher. And so, they put the torch, they put the pitcher over the torch. Everybody blows their trumpets, and Gideon, right? I'll get the right one. Gideon, he has his men encircle the camp of the Midianites. And he says, on my signal, blow your trumpets, break your pitcher. It's night. So that's what they do. So Gideon gives a signal. They all do this. So these 300 guys have surrounded the camp. The Midianites wake up and, we're dead meat. It's Joshua, right? And so what do? It's just mass panic. They flee. They leave all their stuff behind, and they just panic, and they get out of there. And so God obviously knew what he was doing. And so then Gideon is able to defeat the Midianites, take out their kings, and there is 40 years of peace. Okay, now we have Jephthah, who made a vow that he would sacrifice the first thing that came out of his house. I don't know why he did that, but he did. And so the first thing that came out of his house was his daughter. And there's some question as to whether or not he actually sacrificed his daughter or if she remained a perpetual virgin. Samson, you know about Samson, super strong guy, right? Where did his trouble lie? With women. He obviously had a problem with women. He ends up eventually with Delilah, and Delilah is always asking him, why are you so strong? You'd think he'd wise up a little bit, because every time he tells her something, she does it. And then says, oh, Samson, the Philistines are upon you. And he gets out of it. So, I don't know, eventually he says, it's my hair. Cut my hair, and I'll be weak. So that's what happened. His hair is cut. He cannot escape from the Philistines. They gouge out his eyes and make him labor for them. End of his life, he is let out so the Philistines can mock him once again. And he asks the boy who leads him out if he will put his hands on the two middle pillars, because remember, he can't see. And he sends the boy away, and so he prays one last time, and it said there are about 3,000 men and women on the roof. And so Samson then, God gives him strength one last time. He pushes the pillars apart, and then the balcony falls down, and Samson is killed along with the Philistines. So he killed more Philistines in his death than when he was alive. Then we get to the end of Judges, and it's super, super, super sad. We have the tribe of Dan. They're not able to take their territory. So they go north in chapter 18, verse 27, come to a city of Laish, where there's nobody to help them, no big guns to help them. Against the Danites, they conquer that city, and they rename it Dan. They have taken a guy named Micah, who acted as a priest, and they set him up. He wasn't exactly a priest, but they set him up to be their priest. So that's kind of sad. And then the last one in 19 through 21 is very, very sad. The Levite had a concubine. The concubine was unfaithful to the Levite, and so she went back eventually to her home in Bethlehem, to her father's house. The Levite goes to get her, and the father-in-law keeps convincing the Levite to stay another day. No, don't go, don't go, don't go. And finally the Levite says, we got to go, and it's later in the day. And so they are heading north to Ephraim, and the servant of the Levite says, hey, let's stay in Jebus. Later on, it's called Jerusalem. And the Levite said, no, those are non-Israelites in there, and so I don't really want to stay there. And so in chapter 19, verse 12 and following, this is where I'm talking about. In verse 14, they pass near Gibeah, which belongs to the tribe of Benjamin, and so they decide that they will stay in that city because that is inhabited by Israelites. An old man invites them into his house, and he takes care of them and their donkeys. And while they're in there, the men of the city, they are called worthless fellows in my Bible, they surround the house, pound on the door, speak to the owner of the house, and they want the owner to bring out the guy, i.e. the Levite, in order that they can know him. And when Adam knew his wife Eve, it actually produced a child. So there are a couple ways to understand the word that's translated no in Hebrew. It does have the sense you can know that that chair is maroon, whatever, but sometimes it has the idea of sex. So in this case, they want to have sex with the guy, and the men are always happy, it seems like, to throw out their virgin daughters. Happened with Lot and his concubine. You can humble them, have sex with them as much as you want, but don't do it against this guy. So eventually the man, the Levite, seizes his concubine, throws her out. They rape her, abuse her all night long. And morning comes, she falls at the doorway of the man's house, and she is dead. So how could this happen in the land of Israel? Okay, in the land of Benjamin, in the city of Israel. So the Levite is not very happy, so he cuts his concubine in 12 pieces, sends one piece to each of the 12 tribes of Israel, says, this is terrible, it shouldn't happen. They try to get Benjamin to discipline their own people, but they refuse, so there's a civil war. All the tribes go and fight against the tribe of Benjamin. They're successful, and they get to the point where there are only 600 people left, 600 men in the tribe of Benjamin. So that's Judges chapter 20, verse 47. And so they think about this and they say, oh man, we don't really want to totally annihilate the tribe of Benjamin. So we all swore we wouldn't let our daughters marry any of these Benjamites. So who hasn't come to fight with us? Oh, Jabesh Gilead. Nobody from Jabesh Gilead has helped us in this fight. So they go attack Jabesh Gilead, kill all the men, all the women that had been with a man, and get the virgins. And so they get 400 virgins, so they're 200 short. So they tell the people of Benjamin to snag some virgins when they're on their way to a festival at Shiloh. So they snag 200 there, so the men of Benjamin have a wife. And so in verse 25, the author of Judges closes, in those days there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in their own eyes. Ruth then is an uplifting story because Ruth takes place in the time of the Judges, and we're not going to spend much time on Ruth because you're pretty familiar with it, and then we'll work on our united monarchy. But she is, in contrast to Judges, she's a foreigner, she's a Moabite woman, and she goes back home with her mother-in-law after all the men have died. Naomi's husband, Ruth and Orpah, had married Naomi's sons, and the sons die, Naomi's husband dies, so Naomi decides to go back to her home in Bethlehem. And her daughter-in-laws start out with her, but Naomi says, guys, go back, okay? I can't provide you with a future husband, okay? I'm too old. Even if I could have children, I'm too old. By the time, they grew up, you'd be too old. So this isn't gonna work. Orpah goes back. Ruth says, nope, nope, nope. I am going to go with you. And so she says to her mother-in-law in Ruth 1, verse 16, where you go, I will go. Where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. So Ruth goes back with Naomi, work out, eventually, she ends up working in the field, gleaning in the field of Boaz, who is actually a relative of Naomi. And Boaz takes note of her and says, make sure you don't pick everything up. Yes, she can drink the water, eat the food with us, that's fine. And so they come up with a plan to try and get Boaz to marry Ruth, He's willing to go along with it, but he says there's a kinsman that's closer, so he has to go check and make sure he isn't willing to marry Ruth. Ruth chapter 4, Boaz and the closer relative are talking, and Boaz brings up there's a field that needs to be redeemed, and the guy's interested in the field, but then Boaz says, oh, and by the way, Ruth the Moabitess goes with this deal. So nope, he can't do that. He'll jeopardize his inheritance. So Boaz marries Ruth. They have children, and down in verse 17 of Ruth 4, a son has been born to Naomi. They name him Obed. He's the father of Jesse. Jesse is the father of David. And Jesse is from Tamar, when Judah thought she was a prostitute. Remember, Tamar gives birth to twins. Perez is one of Tamar's boys. So we have depressing judges at the end, but Ruth, she's kind of a breath of fresh air. Okay, so as we continue on, then we go into the book of Samuel. So Samuel is the last judge. Well, let me get my PowerPoint up for Samuel. Oops, I lost my mouse. Here, mouse. Well, there, maybe I'll be able to find my mouse. My mouse has disappeared. Say what? You can see, oh, you can see my mouse? Oh, sorry. Let's see if that's the right thing. Oh, no, I think I have to go further over. Oh, well, maybe that is the right thing. Oh, that's just back. Huh. Well, I have to go. Oh, let me see. Oh, there's my mouse. Oh, good. Okay, there's my pointer. It's not really my mouse. Okay, no. Nope, I don't want you. I want Shemuel. Okay, so Samuel. So in Samuel, we are introduced to a woman named Hannah. And Hannah doesn't have any children, and she is wife number 2. Okay, her husband, Elkanah, has 2 wives. And Peninnah, she has a bunch of kids. Hannah has no children. And we're told that every year they would go to Shiloh and sacrifice. Now, Elkanah is a good guy because notice verse 5, even though Hannah doesn't have any children, he still treats her well, right? He actually gives her a double portion. And he loves her. It doesn't matter that she hasn't had any children. Verse 8, he says, Hannah, why do you weep and why don't you eat? Why is your heart sad? Aren't I better to you than 10 sons? But still, it was super important for ladies to have children in those days. So when they go to Shiloh, which is where the tabernacle is, she is praying. And her lips are moving, but Eli isn't hearing any words. So they suggest when people prayed in those days, they prayed out loud. And so Eli assumes that she is drunk, verse 13 and 14. And Hannah says, nope, I'm just distressed. And so she isn't a worthless woman. but she's spoken out of her great concern, her heart. Eli says, "Go in peace, may the God of Israel grant your petition." And so she becomes pregnant, and she does have a boy. Now, she has promised that she would give this boy to the Lord. So when he is old enough to be weaned, then Hannah makes another trip to Shiloh. And she leaves her young son there. They wean people later than a lot of ladies do today, so maybe 3 years old or so, somewhere around there. But he's still pretty little, right? But she made a promise to the Lord that she would dedicate him to the Lord, and so she fulfills her end of the promise. And so he is left at Shiloh. And we are told that Eli's sons in chapter 2, verse 12, are deadbeats, big deadbeats. So look at what they do. Somebody's offering a sacrifice and they're boiling the meat. They had a 3-pronged fork in their hand and they would put it in the kettle. Now this is supposed to be for God, and then they would keep it. Before they burned the fat, they wanted to get the meat for roasting. And in another place, it talks about how they would sleep with the women that served at the temple. So his sons are not good at all. Now, at the end of chapter 2 and verse 18 and following, we're told that Mom, Hannah, would come once a year and she would make Samuel a new little robe for him to wear. So she got to see him once a year. Now, Hannah does, again, in verse 21, have 3 sons and 2 daughters. And the boy Samuel grew before the Lord. So Samuel is called by the Lord, and Samuel says what's going to happen to, Samuel is told by God what's going to happen to Eli's house. And Eli's kids are not going to be priests after Eli because they're such deadbeats. Now, Eli wants to know what God said to Samuel, and so Samuel was kind of hemming and hawing a little, but he did tell Eli what was going to happen. And Eli didn't do anything bad to Samuel. We learn in the end of chapter 3, Samuel grew, the Lord was with him, and let none of his words fail. All Israel from Dan even to Beersheba, so from Dan in the north, Beersheba in the south, knew that Samuel was confirmed as a prophet of the Lord. Samuel is the next prophet. Now jump over to chapter 8. So remember at the end of Judges, it talked about what they really needed was a king. Everyone did what was right in their own eyes, Judges said. There was no king in Israel. So the idea was if they had a king, they would be good to go. So in chapter 8, Samuel now is old, and his sons are kind of deadbeats, so they don't walk in the way of the Lord. So the people want a king. Samuel is not happy about this, but God says, it's not you they're rejecting. Look at 1 Samuel 8:7, but it is me. So they're rejecting me, the Lord says, from being king. So listen to them, warn them about what a king will do, but they want a king, go along with it. And so Samuel does warn them in 10 through 18 and talks about, the king's going to take their kids and the best of their field and their male servants, female servants, their flocks, etc., etc. That's what a king is going to do. But they don't care. Verse 20 of chapter 8, what they want a king over us, that we may also be like all the nations, that our king may judge us and go out before us and fight our battles. So they need to search for a king. Who is the king that God is going to have be king? Who's the guy that's going to be king? So there's a dude named Saul. Look at Saul, chapter 9, verse 2. He's a good guy. He's handsome. There wasn't a more handsome person among all the children of Israel. And he's also taller than all the people. This guy should be a good king, right? He looks like a king. He should be a good king. Now, they eventually choose the king. Go to chapter 10 in 1 Samuel, down to verse, let's see, 17. Okay, so they want to publicly choose the king. And so they go by, they go to the tribes, they cast lots to see, and so they narrow it down, Benjamin, and then they keep narrowing it down, family, etc. And finally, the lot is cast for Saul. So Saul is going to be the next king. Now, where is Saul? He isn't here. He's hiding by the baggage. Maybe not a good start if your king, your future king is hiding by the baggage. Okay, but when we get to 1 Samuel 11, Saul does a good job, I think, in this case. So on the other side of the Jordan River, people called Ammonites have attacked the city of Jabesh Gilead. And Saul wants to help them. Now, why would he care about Jabesh Gilead so much? Remember the Benjamites? They took the leftover virgins, the virgins that were in Jabesh Gilead after Benjamin, the tribe of Benjamin, was almost decimated. So there is a connection with Jabesh Gilead. So Saul agrees to help the people of Jabesh Gilead. In verse 6, notice the Spirit of God comes upon Saul mightily. And so he gathers the troops and they go and they fight against Jabesh Gilead, and they are successful. So that would be verse 11 of 1 Samuel 11. Yes.
Comment, I guess. I'm going to jump back to Judges at the end.
Oh, yes.
And when it says that there was no king in Israel,
Yep.
I guess I had thought, my understanding was, it wasn't that God felt that there needed to be a king.
Mm-hmm.
So is it correct then, it is the author of Judges who implies that the reason there's such chaos is there's no king and that there's one needed?
Yeah. It's not God saying this, right? Yeah, it's what the people are thinking.
People are thinking
Yep.
because there's such. The other thing I thought, and kind of hit on it there, ironic that Saul, the first king, would be from the tribe of Benjamin
Oh.
after what we just talked about at the end of Judges,
Mm-hmm.
and that was the tribe of
Yeah, that's tribe of Benjamin. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true.
found that
Yeah,
interesting.
it
I
is
never
interesting.
saw that before.
Oh, that's cool. Okay, so Saul, he kind of has some good points to him, but go to 1 Samuel chapter 15. 1 Samuel chapter 15. So 1 Samuel chapter 15. Saul is supposed to completely destroy the Amalekites. This is what God told him to do. Because of what the Amalekites did when the Israelites were coming up out of Egypt. So Saul goes and fights against the Amalekites. And in verse 8, he captures Agag, the king of the Amalekites. He captures them, leaves them alive. So verse 9, Saul and the people spared Agag, the best of the sheep, oxen, fatling lambs, everything that was good, wasn't willing to destroy them utterly, but everything despised and worthless they utterly destroyed. What were their instructions? Everything. Yes. So nothing should be left alive. So Saul is spoken to by the Lord, and the Lord says, I regret I've made Saul king, in verse 11 of 1 Samuel 15. And so Samuel comes to Saul, and Saul says, hey, blessed are you of the Lord. Man, you know, I did what the Lord told me to do. And Samuel says, what is this bleating of sheep in my ears and the lowing of oxen that I hear? Oh, they brought them from the Amalekites because the people spared the best of the sheep and the oxen to sacrifice the Lord. The rest we utterly destroyed. We did what God told us to do. And Samuel says to Saul, wait, let me tell you what the Lord said. Isn't it true you were little in your own eyes, but you were made head of the tribes of Israel? The Lord anointed you king over Israel, sent you on a mission. Go and utterly destroy the sinners, the Amalekites, and fight against them until they are exterminated. Why didn't you obey the voice of the Lord? Saul insists that he did. I did. But verse 21, the people took some of the spoils, sheep and oxen, the choicest things devoted to destruction, to sacrifice to the Lord at Gilgal. And then Samuel says, look, okay, has the Lord as much delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as in obeying the Lord? Behold, to obey is better than sacrifice, and to heed than the fat of rams. Rebellion is like the sin of divination, and insubordination is like iniquity and idolatry. Because you have rejected the word of the Lord from being king, he has also rejected you from being king. And so Saul says, I've sinned. I've sinned. I feared the people and listened to their voice. Please pardon my sin and return that I may worship the Lord. But it's too late. Okay? This is it. This is the end. You have rejected the Lord one too many times. The Lord has, verse 28, the Lord has torn the kingdom of Israel from you today, given it to your neighbor who is better than you. The glory of Israel will not lie or change his mind. Okay, God says this is going to happen. It's going to happen. Okay. And then verse 32, Saul kills Agag. It says he actually hewed Agag to pieces before the Lord. So Saul did not obey the Lord consistently, and God says, enough.
How much time?
Don't know. That's a good question. We don't know. People will argue that Saul reigned for at least 20 years. He's not done yet, but we don't have any markers. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, it doesn't say after a year this happened or that happened, so people have to guess. And I'm not sure if anybody has tried to come up with a timeline. I don't know. You know, based on what some of the things we have in here. You know, they had this battle or that battle. So it's a good question. I don't know. Mm-hmm. Yep. So it's time to move on. And so it's time to anoint the next king of Israel. So the Lord sends Samuel to Bethlehem, to Jesse the Bethlehemite. And God has selected a king from among Jesse's sons. And he's a little worried that if Saul hears about this, he'll kill me. But the Lord says, take a heifer and say, I've come to sacrifice to the Lord. Okay. So verse 6 of 1 Samuel 16. So Samuel gets to see Jesse's sons. So he looks at the firstborn, Eliab. Yeah, this is the one. God says, nope. Look at verse 7. Don't look at his appearance or the height of his stature, because I have rejected him. For God sees not as a person sees, but because a person looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. And so all these sons of Jesse, 7 of his sons, passed before Samuel, and the Lord has not chosen any of them. And so Samuel says, are these all? Well, there remains, the youngest, but he's out watching the sheep. So Samuel says, well, bring him in. And they bring him in, and he's, I don't know, what do your Bibles have in verse 12? 1 Samuel 16:12. What do you have? What? Rudy. Oh, you have Rudy. Okay, so Rudy, little red, doesn't have a full beard or anything like that. Beautiful eyes, handsome appearance. And this is the one. And it says in verse 13, the Spirit of the Lord came mightily upon David from that time forth. And so the Spirit of the Lord departs from Saul, and Saul has a bad spirit, and that now terrorizes him. So, cool. Okay, David is chosen. Young guy, how old is David when he's anointed king? 7, 6, 8? No, I mean, how old is he when he fights Goliath? You have all those pictures, David's about yay high, right? Like first grade or something like that. Goliath is this high. Is David in first grade when he fights Goliath? Okay, well, they didn't maybe have first grade, but you know what I'm saying. No, not necessarily, okay? He's a young man. So he can be in his teens. He doesn't have to be a little like first grader, third grader, or sixth grader, or something like that. So because when we get to chapter 17, and we have the battle with David and Goliath, so they're in the Elah Valley. You can go to the Elah Valley today and look at the valley and kind of picture what took place. So the Philistines have a champion named Goliath, and this guy is tall, right? He's like, he's 9 feet, I don't know, he's over 9 feet tall. Bronze helmet on his head. He has scale armor, which weighs a lot. Bronze greaves on his legs. He has a bronze javelin. The shaft of his spear is like a weaver's beam, okay? This isn't those skinny little shafts. This is a shaft, okay? And his spear weighs 600, the head of his spear weighs 600 shekels of silver. In verse 7, look, that's maybe about 15 pounds. In his armor, like maybe 125 pounds. So again, depending on how much a shekel would be at this time. And so he comes out, so he's a champion, and he says, choose somebody from yourself and come and fight against me. I defy the ranks of Israel this day. Give me a man that we may fight together. And Saul and all Israel, they're just, this is terrible. But nobody is willing to go fight him. And so David pops in and hears this challenge. And verse 26 of chapter 17, what's going to be done for the one man who kills the Philistines and takes away the reproach of... Oh, yeah. Right, and it's this uncircumcised Philistine. Should he taunt the armies of the living God? I mean, this is terrible. So this is the artist's reconstruction of Goliath. Now, David is willing to fight Goliath. Now, in verse 33, Saul says to David, you're not able to go against this Philistine to fight because you are but a youth. Well, he has been a warrior from his youth. What does it mean David's young, a youth? Again, is he in 6th grade? 12 years old? No, in comparison, right? He's a young man. So I don't know how old he was, but he could have been, 15, 17, 18, whatever. He could have been in that range category. The Philistine Goliath, however, He's been fighting since he was young. So who has the advantage? Obviously the Philistine. I mean, the guy is bigger, has better armor than David, has more experience than David. So things don't really look good for David. But David says, look, verse 37, the Lord delivered me from the paw of the lion, the paw of the bear. He's surely going to deliver me from the hand of the Philistine. And so Saul says, okay, go. May the Lord be with you. Now, Saul tries to give him his armor, and David said, no, don't want it. So it's like, so you have a favorite glove, right? And you know that glove. And you know when you reach your arm out, whether you have to stretch a little bit to get the ball or not. You don't want to use somebody else's glove, right? Because you're not comfortable with it. And so that's the idea. It's not necessarily that Saul's armor didn't fit him or anything, but that's not how David has fought the lion or the bear. Those aren't his tools that he uses. And so he takes what he's comfortable with. He brings his sling, and he has his 5 smooth stones that he got from the brook. And the Philistine is a wee bit put out because who did you send to fight against me? This is like embarrassing. And so the battle comes, verse 48. David ran toward the battle line to meet this guy, takes out a stone, whips it around, hits the Philistine in the head, knocks him out. How big was the stone? You know, it's probably only yay big. Must have been like a hard stone. No, they actually have slingers in the armies in those days. So that was one of your jobs, and a stone would be, you know, like this. And so it talks about in Benjamin, they had left-handed slingers, and you see pictures in ancient Near Eastern drawings of people, that's what they do, they sling stones, and that can be extremely deadly. So so he knocks the guy out, and he needs to kill the guy, so what is he? He has to take David's sword, or not David's, Goliath's sword, and, he takes, it actually says he struck the sword, or he struck the Philistine, killed him. So why does he need a sword? He wants to cut off Goliath's head. He needs his trophy. That's kind of gross, but that's what they did. And so that is a rise of David. He puts his faith in God, and he is able to kill Goliath in the battle. The Philistine army flees, and there you have it. So, now, David's life. We're not going to do that one yet. As we continue through 1 Samuel, Saul keeps on trying to kill David. He is jealous of David. God is blessing David, and Saul isn't very happy with that. But David has 2 times when he could actually have killed Saul when they're running around in the wilderness. Does he? No. No, he doesn't, because it's not his job to kill the Lord's anointed. Now, David's best friend is Jonathan. Who is Jonathan related to? Saul, right? Saul is Jonathan's son. Jonathan will become king after dad dies. You know, Jonathan and David are tight. Okay, they're best friends. Jonathan knows that David is going to be the king, but he is okay with that. Okay, he knows that this is what God has in store. And so Jonathan supports David. I mean, look at Jonathan. He's a good guy. And so as we continue through 1 Samuel, David spends a lot of time running for his life because Saul keeps on trying to kill him, but in the end, Saul is unsuccessful. And so at the end of 1 Samuel, the Philistines fight against Israel. So Saul is up there leading his army, and Saul ends up being badly wounded. And so he asks his armor bearer to kill him because he doesn't want the Philistines to make fun of him, but he won't. So according to the end of 1 Samuel, Saul falls on his own sword. Saul's sons likewise were killed. Okay. So David, when he hears what has happened, mourns the death of Saul, and in particular mourns the death of Jonathan, his best friend. Okay, so David is doing well. Okay, let's see, 2 Samuel, whoops, go back. Yep, okay. So they have a little bit of a battle between who is going to be king. Is it going to be a descendant of Saul, or is it going to be David? And eventually David is made king over Judah, his own tribe. He was king over Judah, but also the northern tribes come to David, and they want David to be his king also. So David now in 2 Samuel 5 is king of both Judah and Israel. So in 2 Samuel chapter 7, we read that David wants to build the temple. Okay, so remember, they don't have any formal building. They have the tabernacle. The Ark of the Covenant is in a city called Kiryat Yearim. Doesn't say that they set up worship there. They just have the ark there. And so David wants to build a temple for the Lord. And so Nathan says, yeah, go for it, in 2 Samuel chapter 7. But the word of the Lord comes to Nathan at night and says, no, David is not the one that is to build the temple for me. So this is what you should tell David, and tells him that he isn't going to be the one that will build the temple. But go down to verse 12. So when you die and you lay down with your ancestors, I'm going to raise up your descendant after you, who will come forth from you, and I will establish his kingdom. And what else? He continues on, and he says, I'll establish your kingdom, and I'll establish your descendant's kingdom. He will build a house for my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. I will be a father to him. He will be a son to me. When he commits sin, I will correct him with the rod of men and the strokes of the children of men. But my loving kindness will not depart from him, as I took from Saul, whom I removed from before you. Your house and your kingdom will endure before me forever. Your throne will be established forever. So this is what's called the Davidic covenant. So the covenant that God made with David, this is where he promises David that his house and kingdom will endure before the Lord forever. So ultimately, the Messiah is going to come from a descendant of David. This is what then it traces back to. So David does not get to build the temple, but David does collect supplies for the temple. So he can't put it together, but he collects a lot of the supplies for when his son, whatever son that might be, will build the temple. Okay, so what else? Okay. We didn't talk about David's capitals. So David's second and final capital. So eventually he conquers Jerusalem, and it suggested they conquer it through a water tunnel. So they sneak in through the water tunnel, and Jerusalem now it becomes David's capital. So you can't really see Jerusalem on this map.
So up until this time, Jerusalem had never been conquered?
Nope. Nope, it's always been with Jebusites. Yeah, so it's this little enclave in the middle of, yep, that's right. Okay, let's see, what else do we have? Okay, it's very sad. We hit 2 Samuel 11. 2 Samuel 11. So it's in the spring of the year, and what's supposed to happen in the spring of the year? Yeah, and who's supposed to go out and fight? Kings. Kings are supposed to go out to battle, right? Kings are supposed to go out to battle. David's a king, right? And where's David? He stayed in Israel. He stayed in Jerusalem. He stayed in Jerusalem. Why did he stay? He's supposed to be out there with his troops, okay, fighting over there on the other side of the Jordan River. They're fighting against the Ammonites at the city of Rabbah. But instead, the guy gets into deep trouble. Verse 2, it's evening. He gets up from his bed. He's walking around on his roof. He sees a woman bathing. Now, the city of Jerusalem is like 10 to 12 acres. Again, everything is very small. Would you say it was like 4 city blocks is 10 acres? Yeah, but that's 10 acres, right? So 4 city blocks. So 4 city blocks is about 10 acres. So 10 to 12 acres is all the bigger the city of David, Jerusalem is. And it's built on a hill. And the kings get the good part. They get the high part, the high ground. So David is in elevation, able to look down on the people that are below him. Now, exactly what Bathsheba is doing, some people will suggest that she was maybe trying to seduce David. I don't know. People in this time, that doesn't mean people can't mess up, but, they were pretty moral, pretty modest, and those kinds of things. She was a good-looking woman. And David sees her, so he asks about her, and he is told that this is Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam, the wife of Uriah the Hittite. And the thing is Eliam is connected to, he's one of his mighty men, and Eliam is related to, I believe, if I remember right, it's Ahithophel, who was one of David's counselors. So the point is that Bathsheba is related to one of David's mighty men and related to one of David's counselors. So David would have been able to put all that together. And she is a wife of Uriah the Hittite. Hello, she's a wife of Uriah the Hittite. Why on earth does he send messengers? It's nighttime. Why does he send messengers and have her come to him? I don't know. It doesn't say. But she comes, he has sex with her, she becomes pregnant. Ruh-roh, we have a problem. Okay, because now there's evidence that something's going on. Where is her husband? Fighting the battle that the king should be at. And so, they need to do something. So David says to Joab, the commander, hey, send Uriah back. And so David tries to get Uriah to go sleep in the same house as his wife. And hopefully have sex with his wife. Because then who knows whose kid it will be. But it doesn't work. Now, does Uriah have suspicions about what's going on? Is he a soldier and his fellow soldiers can't have sex with their wives. So does he not do that because of that reason? I don't exactly know, but what does David do? This isn't working, and so David sends a note. He gives Uriah a note, and it says that send Uriah to the front, pull back, make sure he stays up there and gets killed. Obviously, David is clearly not thinking clearly, right? So he is going to have a guy killed in battle because he, David, had sex with his wife. And that's what happens. Uriah is killed in battle. And so, Bathsheba mourns for her husband. And now David sends for her after the time of mourning is over, and she becomes his wife, and she has a boy. But the narrator tells us in verse 27 of 2 Samuel 11, the thing that David has done was evil in the sight of the Lord. Now, David at this point is not repentant. So, chapter 12 of 2 Samuel, the Lord sends Nathan. So Nathan the prophet comes and has a conversation with David. And he tells him a story. Why does he tell him a story? Just hit him over the head. Read the 10 Commandments. What does it say? You shall not commit adultery, right? He should have just slapped him upside the head with that, printed it on a board and hit him over the head with it. But he doesn't. He tells him a story. So he tells him 2 men were in a city. One was rich, the other was poor. The rich man had a great many flocks and herds. The poor man had nothing, just as one little ewe lamb, which he bought and nourished, and it grew up together with him and his children. Look, it would eat of his food and drink of his cup and lie in his bosom. It was like a daughter to him. And the traveler came to the rich man, and he's unwilling to take from his own flock or herd. And so what does he do? He takes his poor man's ewe lamb and sacrifices it, prepares it for the man who had come. And David, how does David react to that story? Ooh, he is angry, right? So you know when you go fishing, you cast your line out there, you reel it, and you play with it, waiting for the fish, and you get your nibble and you go like that, and you got him, you hooked it. This is what Nathan has done for David, okay? He hasn't told him point blank, adultery is wrong. He tells him a story. He hooks David. David is now mad at this rich man who took this poor guy's ewe lamb, the only one he had. And Nathan says, look, in David, he commits himself, right? As the Lord lives, surely the man who has done this deserves to die. He must make restitution for the lamb fourfold because he did this thing and had no compassion. Nathan says, you are the man. Okay? This is what the Lord said. I anointed you king over Israel. It's I who delivered you from the hand of Saul. I gave you your master's house, your master's wives. I gave you the house of Israel and Judah. If that had been not enough, I would have added more things. So why have you despised the Lord by doing evil in his sight? You struck down Uriah the Hittite with a sword, taken his wife to be your wife, have killed him with the sword of the children of Ammon. And the sword now will never depart from your house, because you have despised me and have taken the wife of Uriah the Hittite to be your wife. I will raise up evil against you from your own household. I will even take your wives before your eyes and give them to your companion, and he will lie with your wives in broad daylight. You did it in secret, but I will do this before all Israel under the sun. Now, to David's credit, he recognized that he has sinned. And the Lord, and Nathan says, the Lord has taken away your sin. You will not die, but the child will die. And so the child that was conceived in adultery, that child dies. In Psalm 51, remember the heading of Psalm 51 is connected to after David realizes his sin against Bathsheba, that create in me a clean heart, O God, right? Renew a right spirit within me. Now, the headings you take with a grain of salt, but it would be a good psalm to connect with David on the other side of seeing what he has actually done. Okay, so David does go back in to Bathsheba, who is now his wife, sleeps with her, and she gives birth to a son, and this son is Solomon. So as we continue on and look at David's life, his life now tanks. And God said there would be consequences. There are consequences to his actions. Chapter 13. So, Absalom is a son of David. His sister, Tamar, is his full sister, okay? So she's his full sister. Amnon is also a son of David, but they have different mothers. Now, Amnon wants his sister, and we're told that Tamar is a virgin, and Amnon was trying to do everything he could to have sex with his half-sister. And so he concocts, he and a friend concoct a scheme to get Tamar alone with Amnon. And Amnon then rapes his sister Tamar. And Dad doesn't really do anything about it. Tamar tries to say, well, marry me, make it right by marrying me, but Amnon at that point hates her because he got what he wanted. And so David in verse 21 of 2 Samuel 13 is angry, but he doesn't do anything about it. Now Absalom, the full brother, he bides his time, and he takes vengeance, avenges Tamar in verses 24 and following of 2 Samuel 13. He invites all the king's sons down to a sheep shearing festival, and Amnon comes. And Absalom commanded his servants, so when Amnon is, drunk, and I say to you, strike Amnon, put him to death. Don't be afraid, because I've commanded you, so be courageous. And so that's exactly what they do. So Amnon is killed. David hears about this and is afraid that all the king's sons have been put to death, but only Amnon is dead. And verse 39 says, David longed to go after Absalom, but he was comforted concerning Amnon since he was dead. So this affects greatly the relationship between Absalom and David. So it's now broken. Absalom doesn't really have a lot of respect for his father. This is a big crack in their relationship. So in 2 Samuel 15, Absalom conspires against his dad to take over the kingship. So in verses 1 through 6, he sits outside the gate of Jerusalem, and when people come in, he tries to find out where they're from, and if anyone would say, he'd say, well, what city are you from? And they would say, your servant is from one of the tribes of Israel. And he would then say to them, see, your claims are, you have valid claims, but you're not going to get heard on the part of the king of Israel. He's not going to listen to you because you're from the wrong tribe. Judah is David's tribe. You're from Israel. And Absalom said, oh man, if only I were a judge, then I would do it in your favor, in essence, is what he's saying. And so what happens is he ends up turning away. He ends up turning people towards him away from David. So as we continue on in chapter 13, David actually leaves Jerusalem. Absalom then takes over Jerusalem, so he's fighting against his father. He goes in and he sleeps with David's concubines in broad daylight, it says. So remember that the Lord said that the consequences of David, he would have consequences for sleeping with Bathsheba. So that's kind of sad. So verses 21 and 22, chapter 16, verses 21 and 22. Ahithophel, counselor, tells Absalom to go and sleep with the concubines that David left behind to keep house. And so they do that. And so then Absalom goes in and sleeps, has sex with them. Not good. Okay, as we continue, so eventually they have to fight against Absalom. Absalom gets his head caught in a tree, and it wasn't real helpful for him. But that worked because then Joab and his armor bearers are able to kill Absalom. So this should be a good thing, right? However, David loved Absalom. You know, some of these guys that are good kings are not very good fathers. And so he had, obviously in this instance, had trouble being a father, didn't stick up for his daughter Tamar when his one son rapes her. I mean, that's not okay. Absalom lost respect for dad, and so things are a mess. So David had actually ordered that Absalom wouldn't be killed, but Joab ignored that, and David then weeps over the death of Absalom loudly. So the army knows that David is sorrowful because Absalom is killed, but the army has been fighting on David's behalf. So Joab rebukes David and says, look, this isn't right. Okay, you need to stop this. And so David then is able to return to Israel. Okay. So David does really, really, really well, starts out really well, and then at the end of his life, after his sin with Bathsheba, he tanks. So that's very sad. Okay, so then David's son takes over, Shlomo, Solomon. He takes over and is king after his father. Now there is a little battle, kind of, sort of, who's going to be king. Adonijah sets himself up to be king, another son, older son of Solomon, older son of David. And Nathan the prophet, Zadok, they go, and David's still alive. He's very, very old. He's still alive, and they say, hey, David, didn't you promise Bathsheba that her son Solomon would be king when you died? And so David says, yes. So tells these guys to go crown Solomon king. And so that is what they do. David charges Solomon before he dies. He encourages him to be faithful to the Lord. And yes, David blew it with Bathsheba, but one thing the author of Kings consistently says is David was a man after God's own heart. So David had that going for him. And to his credit, when he messed up with Bathsheba, and Nathan confronts him, he does repent. Okay, he does realize his sin. Okay, so Solomon is put on the throne. He has to take care of a little business. First, his brother Adonijah is put to death. It's suggested that he kind of, when he asked for the well, it wasn't a concubine, when he asked to have David's hot water bottle as a wife, that was a no-no, because they suggest that if you ask for somebody that's close like that to a king, then you are seeking the kingship yourself. David, when he got old, he couldn't stay warm, so they had a virgin come and lay with him, but it says they didn't have sex. He just needed a warm body. So they couldn't do a dog or anything, but they had to have a beautiful young woman. So anyways, so Adonijah ends up being put to death. Abiathar the priest, who spoke against David, was on the wrong side. He is dismissed. Joab, he is put to death because he shed blood of an innocent man. So these are the things that David said to Solomon, look, do these things when you get on the throne. A guy named Shimei who cursed David. Solomon limits him to Jerusalem. If you go beyond this boundary, then you will be killed. He does it, and so then he likewise is put to death. So in 1 Kings 2:46, then, it tells us, thus the kingdom was established in the hands of Solomon. Solomon, he's a good guy. One of the first things we're told that he does is he marries Pharaoh's daughter. Why would he marry Pharaoh's daughter? It tells us in verse 1, it's a marriage alliance. Okay, that's what they did. So you want to join, make an alliance with a country, one of the things you can do is marry their kids. That's what he does. Now, this is going to come back and haunt him in chapter 11. Now, we're told that Solomon, verse 3, loved the Lord. And Solomon goes to Gibeon, and God appears to him in a dream. And God says, okay, what do you want? Ask for anything. And Solomon says, verse 9, give your servant an understanding heart to judge your people, to discern between good and evil. For who is able to judge this great people of yours? Okay, so I'm young, haven't had a lot of experience in this. Please give me wisdom, understanding to judge this people. And the Lord was very, very pleased at what he asks for and said, because you haven't asked for long life or riches or the life of your enemies, but discernment, I will give you that. I will give you a wise and discerning heart so that there has been no one like you before you or after. And I will also give what you haven't asked, riches and honor. So there won't be any king like you. If you walk in my ways, keeping my statutes and commandments, as your father David walked, then I will prolong your days. So Solomon then woke up from his dream. So in chapter 3 then, he gets a chance to prove his wisdom. So you know the story, 2 harlots, they both had babies within days of each other. They have to sleep with them. That's how they keep them warm, right? And one lady ends up sleeping on her child, and the child dies. So the one with the dead child woke up in the middle of the night and switches kids. And so they bring this case before Solomon, and they say, no, it's mine, no, it's mine. And so Solomon says, bring me a sword, verse 24. And so they bring a sword, and he says, okay, divide the living child in two, and each mother or each woman will get half. Pretty smart thing to do, right? And he must have looked like he was really going to do it, right? Because the woman whose child was the living one, the real mother, says, no, it's okay, just forget it, let her have him. And Solomon says, okay, give the one that spoke up the child because she is the mother. because she didn't want her child to die. She would rather let somebody else have the child so he could live. And so when all Israel, verse 28, heard of the judgment which the king had handed down, they feared the king, for they saw the wisdom of God was in him to administer justice. And Solomon then is the one that does build the temple, and they have an awesome celebration when the temple is finished and the glory of the Lord enters the temple. So like 1 Kings 8 and following, they sacrifice a bazillion animals, and it's really, really, really cool, the celebration they have. And this is an artist reconstruction of Solomon's temple. So again, now Jerusalem is a city God chose, so now they have a permanent place, so they can build a permanent building. They don't need a tent anymore. Oh, these are just all slides. Artist reconstructions, it was all gold inside. It'd be totally awesome looking. Yes, wouldn't that be cool to be in that brand new, really cool, nice thing? Yes. So in 1 Samuel 9, Solomon has another visit from God. God appears to him in a dream the second time. And once again, if you'll walk before me, so I've heard your prayer, your supplication. As for you, if you walk before me as your father David did, with integrity and uprightness of heart, then I will establish the throne of your kingdom over Israel forever, just as I promised your father David. But if you or your sons turn away from following me, okay, well then it's not going to be so good. Okay. So, the Queen of Sheba, so Sheba, maybe modern day Yemen, she way down there hears about the wisdom of Solomon and goes up and visits him because she wants to see this in person. And so Solomon visits with her, shows her his stuff, and she is just amazed. And she says, verse 7, she didn't believe the reports until she came with her own eyes to see it. And she says, behold, the half was not told me. You exceed in wisdom and prosperity the report which I heard. So Solomon is a very, 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 very wise man. Now, being a super duper wise man, this is not good at the end of his life. So in 1 Kings 11, Solomon marries many foreign women. Oh, man. Okay, well, why does he do that again? Yep, alliances, right? So political alliances. Okay, well, but the problem is, foreign women from the nations concerning which the Lord has said to the children of Israel, you shall not associate with them, nor shall they associate with you, for they will surely turn your heart away after their deities. But Solomon held fast to these in love. And Solomon had a wad of women. I did the math. If I gave him 30 wives when he began, and if we take these numbers literally, it says he ruled 40 years. He would have had to marry 16.75 wives every single year of his reign in order to get this many. And he would have had to have taken 7.5 concubines every year of his reign. That's too many weddings. You can't have 1.5 weddings when you're marrying royalty. So again, suggested that this number is exaggerated for the sake of effect. Okay, it's not that they couldn't figure out, but they're exaggerating because these are why Solomon went down, because of all these foreign wives he had. And so verse 4, his wives, when Solomon is old, turn his heart away after other gods, and his heart is not totally devoted to the Lord his God, as the heart of David his father. So David messed up with Bathsheba, big time. But David repented after he messed up. He didn't turn to other deities. Solomon did. And look at it, tells he went after the Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Sidonians, and after Milcom, the detestable idol of the Ammonites. Solomon did what was evil in the sight of the Lord and didn't follow the Lord fully. And look, he builds a high place for Chemosh, the detestable idol of Moab, on the mountain that's east of Jerusalem. What mountain is east of Jerusalem? Mount of Olives. Okay, we're talking, the temple is here, it faces east. You have the Kidron Valley, which is not that big, and then you have the Mount of Olives. That's where Jesus and the disciples, they left the city after they had the Last Supper, took a little jaunt through the Kidron Valley, take you, 10, 15 minutes to get to the other side. Went to the Garden of Gethsemane, probably down here somewhere in the Mount of Olives. But Solomon builds altars to foreign deities. So you look out the temple, you go out the temple, bam, right there you have not the cross, but you have altars for foreign deities. Bad idea, right? This is not good. And so this is what he did for all his foreign wives. And so the response of God is, obviously he's angry, and he appeared to him twice in a dream. And he commanded him not to do this. But Solomon, as wise as he was, did not listen. And so this is what's going to happen. I'm going to tear the kingdom from you and will give it to your servant. I won't do it in your days because of David, but I will tear it out of the hands of your son. I'm not going to rip the whole thing away. I'll leave you one tribe for the sake of my servant David and for the sake of Jerusalem, for which I have chosen. So, Solomon, very wise individual, but totally messes up at the end when he actually builds altars to foreign deities. So, comments, questions? Okay, so, you feel like you've been through a lot? Yeah, we didn't make it through the whole Old Testament. Well, thank you. It's been fun. So I guess we're good to go. Have a blessed evening, and we'll see you around. Okay, good. Yes.